I still can't decide if it was real or if my sleep-deprived mind just broke for a while. My daughter, Lily, was barely 3 months old then. My husband worked night shifts, so most nights it was just me and her. I'd gotten used to the constant half-sleep, the sound of the baby monitor always humming quietly next to me, the soft rustle of the baby moving in her crib. That night started out normal enough. It was around 1 a.m. when Lily began fussing, not crying exactly, just that restless, low whimper babies make when they're about to wake up hungry. I remember sighing, rolling out of bed, and padding down the hallway to her room. The nursery light was dim, just the little moon-shaped nightlight plugged into the wall. The air felt heavier than usual, like the house was holding its breath. I picked Lily up and began rocking her gently, whispering softly. She quieted almost immediately, and that struck me as strange. Usually, she'd cry a bit longer before settling. I was humming under my breath when I noticed something odd. From the corner of my eye, I thought I saw movement, a small shift, like a shadow pulling back, near the rocking chair in the corner of the room. I froze. The hair on my neck stood up. The chair was gently rocking, even though I hadn't touched it. I told myself it was just a draft, or maybe my eyes playing tricks on me in the low light. But then, the baby monitor crackled. Through the static, I heard a faint sound. Not crying, not my voice, just a whisper. A soft, rhythmic hum, like someone was singing. It was the same lullaby I'd been humming to Lily. My chest tightened. I slowly turned my head toward the monitor. The small screen showed the nursery, me standing there, holding Lily, and behind me, near the corner of the room, something that looked like movement. I blinked, and it was gone. I reached out and turned off the monitor completely. My hands were shaking. I didn't want to look anymore. I just took Lily back to my room, closed the door, and tried to convince myself I was just exhausted. But as I lay there, trying to fall asleep, I could still hear something faint coming from the baby monitor on the nightstand, even though it was turned off. A soft hum, the same lullaby. The next morning, I tried to brush it off. Sleep deprivation can mess with your head, I told myself. Maybe I'd left the monitor on without realizing it. Maybe it had picked up some radio signal or interference. Anything but what I thought I saw. The day went by like normal, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I passed Lily's room, I felt uneasy, like the air around the door was colder than the rest of the house. By the time night fell, I had convinced myself it was just nerves. Still, when I put her to bed, I left the hallway light on. Around 2 a.m., I woke up again to the monitor crackling, that low, distorted static sound that makes your stomach twist for no reason. I sat up and glanced at the screen. Lily was asleep, perfectly still. Nothing seemed out of place. But after a few seconds, I noticed something off. Her mobile was moving, slowly, back and forth. That wouldn't be strange, except it wasn't on. It was one of those wind-up ones that plays a short tune and stops, but it was swinging silently, as if someone had just brushed against it. I leaned closer to the monitor, squinting, and then I saw it, a hand, not a full body, not even an arm, just the shape of a pale hand reaching into the crib from the edge of the frame. I gasped so hard that the sound startled Lily awake through the monitor. She began crying immediately. I dropped the device, heart pounding, and ran down the hall faster than I've ever moved. When I reached her room, the door was half closed. I could see the nightlight still glowing, the crib in its usual spot. I pushed the door open, my voice trembling as I said her name. She was fine, lying there, red-faced and crying, but unharmed. The room was empty. I picked her up, whispering to calm her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still there. I could feel it, like eyes on the back of my neck. The mobile above the crib was perfectly still now. Then I noticed something else. The window. It was unlocked. I was sure I'd closed it earlier. I locked it again and checked every corner of the room, my hands trembling. Nothing. No one. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the rocking chair with Lily in my arms, staring at the monitor on the floor, afraid to turn it back on. But around 4 a.m., I heard something that made me freeze. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks from inside the wall behind the crib. I didn't move for a long time. My arms went numb from holding Lily, but I couldn't make myself shift an inch. The knock stopped after a few seconds, but the silence that followed felt heavier than before. The kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat in your ears. After what felt like forever, I stood up and backed out of the room, whispering over and over that everything was fine. I told myself it was the pipes, or the house settling, anything but what it sounded like. The next morning, I called my neighbor, who's a contractor. I told him there might be something wrong with the foundation or the walls. He came over that afternoon, brought tools, and started checking behind the crib. After a few minutes, he frowned and said, "You've got a hollow space here." He knocked again, and sure enough, the sound was different, like there was a gap behind the drywall. He cut a small hole to check for mold or wiring issues. When he peeled the panel back, the smell hit us first, damp wood and something sour like rot. Behind the wall was a narrow crawl space, no bigger than a closet. He pointed his flashlight inside, and for a second, neither of us said a word. There were things in there: an old blanket, a set of children's blocks, and a baby monitor, an older model, the kind with an antenna. He turned to me and asked, "You said this house was built in the 70s, right? You didn't put that in there?" I shook my head. My throat felt dry. I couldn't look away from that old monitor. It was positioned facing outward, toward the small crack in the wall, like someone had been watching through it. We sealed the wall that same day. I moved Lily's crib to my room and threw away her new monitor. It's been a year since then, and nothing strange has happened. At least, not like before. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm half asleep, I swear I can still hear the faint click of that old monitor turning on. And once in a while, when I check on Lily, she's already awake, staring at the wall where her crib used to be. This happened 2 years ago, when my son, Ethan, was about 3. I still can't explain what I saw, and even now thinking about it makes my skin crawl. At the time, I was a single parent, renting a small house on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet, and the backyard was perfect for Ethan to run around in. The only thing I didn't like about that place was how old it was. The floors creaked with every step, and the lights had this faint flicker whenever the wind picked up. Ethan was an easy kid, quiet, imaginative, always talking to his toys. I used to think it was cute how he'd sit in the corner and have full conversations with his stuffed animals. But one night, that started to change. It was a little after midnight when I woke up to the sound of his voice. I could hear him through the baby monitor, soft, whispering, like he was talking to someone. I remember lying there, half asleep, assuming he was dreaming. Then I heard it again, clearer this time. He said, "Okay, but you can't tell Mommy." That made me sit up. I grabbed the monitor and turned the volume up, but there was only static now, the kind of static that hums low, almost like breathing. My heart started to race. I got out of bed and walked down the hall. The floorboards creaked under my feet, and the closer I got to his room, the colder it felt. When I opened the door, Ethan was sitting up in bed. He smiled at me like nothing was wrong. "Go back to sleep, buddy," I whispered. "Who were you talking to?" He pointed toward the corner of the room, the one spot the nightlight didn't reach. "My friend," he said, his voice calm. "There's no one there," I told him, forcing a smile. But as I said it, I could have sworn I heard something, a faint shuffle, like fabric brushing the floor. I turned the light on. The corner was empty. Ethan yawned and laid back down, his little hand still pointing toward the shadow. "They don't like the light," he mumbled before drifting off again. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was just his imagination. Kids make things up all the time, right? But that day, when I went to change his bed sheets, I noticed something strange. In the corner of the room, the same corner he had pointed to, there were tiny scratches on the wall, thin, uneven lines, as if someone had been digging their nails into the paint. I ran my fingers over them. They weren't there before. I was sure of it. That night, I made sure to leave the hallway light on. Ethan fell asleep quickly, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Every creak of the old house felt louder. Every gust of wind against the windows sounded like a whisper. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. His voice, faint but distinct, through the baby monitor. Only this time, he wasn't whispering. He was crying. I rushed to his room, my heart pounding so hard, it felt like it was echoing in my ears. The door was half open. The light from the hallway spilled across the floor, but the rest of the room was dark. Ethan was sitting up, his eyes wide and fixed on the corner again. I called his name, but he didn't look at me. His lips were trembling. "They're mad," he whispered. "You turned the light on last night." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. "Who's mad, Ethan?" He didn't answer. He just kept staring, frozen, his breathing shallow. I turned on the lamp beside his bed, and for a second, I thought I saw something. Something small, low to the ground, slipping into the shadow near the wall. It was gone before I could focus on it. I told myself it was my eyes playing tricks, that it was nothing, that I was tired. I pulled Ethan close and stayed with him until he fell asleep again. But when I tried to leave the room, I felt it. A cold draft brushed the back of my neck. It wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from the vent near the floor, the one that led down to the basement. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about that vent, about the cold air that came from it, even though the heater wasn't running. The basement had always made me uncomfortable. It was unfinished, cluttered, and smelled faintly of damp wood and rust. When Ethan went down for his nap, I decided to check it out. I told myself it was just to make sure there wasn't a broken pipe or something simple. But when I opened the basement door, a wave of cold air hit me like I'd opened a freezer. The light switch didn't work. So I grabbed a flashlight and went down, one slow, creaking step at a time. The air grew heavier the further I went. My breath came out in faint clouds. At the bottom, the beam of my flashlight trembled slightly in my hand as I moved it across the room. Boxes, old furniture, the hum of the house settling above me. Then the light landed on something that didn't belong. Tiny handprints, smudged across the concrete floor, leading away from the vent. They were small, too small to be mine, too small even for Ethan's. But there were dozens of them, like a trail. I followed it slowly, each step echoing softly. The prints stopped at the far wall, where a large, old mirror leaned against the bricks. I hadn't seen that mirror before. My reflection looked pale and nervous in the glass, the beam of my flashlight glaring back at me. For a moment, I thought I saw movement behind me, something shifting just out of focus. But when I spun around, there was nothing, just shadows and silence. I turned back to the mirror. Ethan's reflection stood next to mine, but when I looked to my side, he wasn't there. I froze. My body refused to move. In the reflection, his little hand was pressed against the glass, and just behind him, in the dark part of the mirror, something crouched low, long fingers resting on his shoulder. The flashlight flickered and went out. I don't remember running back up the stairs, but when I came to, I was sitting in the living room, gasping for air, my hands shaking. Ethan was upstairs, still asleep, unharmed. I never went back into that basement. A few months later, we moved out. The new owners messaged me once after they moved in, asking if I ever heard noises coming from the basement. I never replied. I don't have an explanation for what I saw that day. But sometimes, when I'm putting Ethan to bed in our new house, I catch him glancing at the vent on the floor. And once, I swear I heard him whisper, "They found us again." My wife and I had just brought home our first child, a baby girl named Lily. She was barely 3 weeks old at the time, and we were both exhausted in that way only new parents understand. Sleep came in fragments, the kind where you close your eyes and open them again to find the room darker, the air heavier, and your body still aching. We lived in a small house at the edge of town, an old place with creaky floors and thin walls that made every sound seem closer than it was. The baby's room was across the hall from ours. We kept a monitor by the bed, and every night, that faint static became the background noise of our lives. That night, I woke up around 2:30 in the morning. The monitor crackled softly, and for a moment, I thought I heard something. A voice, maybe, low and rhythmic. It wasn't crying, though. The noise was faint but steady, like someone softly singing a lullaby through the static. My first thought was that my wife had gotten up to feed Lily, so I turned over, but she was still next to me, breathing steadily, asleep. I sat up. The hum continued. Slowly, I reached for the monitor and turned the volume up. The noise became clearer. Definitely a voice now, a woman's voice, humming. I froze. The hairs on my arms stood up. We hadn't turned on any music. There was no one else in the house. For a moment, I tried to convince myself it was interference. Maybe we were picking up a radio signal or something. But then the humming stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of soft movement, like fabric shifting. Then a whisper. "Shh, go back to sleep." I didn't realize I was holding my breath, until I felt my chest ache. I stood up, heart pounding, and grabbed the small flashlight from the nightstand. The floorboards groaned under my feet as I crept toward the nursery. The door was cracked open. A sliver of dim light from the hallway stretched across the crib, and I could see Lily lying there, awake but calm. Her eyes followed something I couldn't see just above her, as if she were watching someone move around the room. I stepped inside, whispering her name, but the air in that room felt wrong, thicker somehow, colder than the rest of the house. The smell of baby powder and milk mixed with something faintly metallic, like rust. I turned the flashlight toward the far corner. Empty, then toward the window. Closed. The monitor on the dresser crackled again. And then, through the static, came that same soft voice. Such a pretty girl. The words were so faint, I wasn't sure I'd actually heard them. But when Lily's eyes suddenly shifted from the ceiling to look right past me, my body went cold. That's when I felt it. A breeze brushing the back of my neck, as if someone had just walked behind me. I spun around instantly, but the room was empty. Nothing but shadows and the steady rhythm of the monitor's static. My breathing was uneven now, shaky and loud in the silence. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I whispered, "Hello?" even though I didn't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself there was no one there. Maybe I wanted an answer. But what I got instead was the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps from the hallway. They weren't heavy, more like the soft tread of bare feet on wood. One step, then another, then silence. I stepped closer to the door, flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam of light caught the edge of the hallway wall, but there was nothing there. Just darkness stretching down toward the living room. I thought about waking my wife, but something about that moment felt fragile. Like if I said anything out loud, I'd break whatever thin barrier was keeping this thing, whatever it was, at a distance. I checked the crib again. Lily was still awake, but her tiny chest rose and fell calmly, like none of this bothered her. Then, right as I turned to leave, I heard it again, humming. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the monitor. It was coming from downstairs. A slow, uneven tune, like someone trying to remember the words to a song they used to know. I should have gone back to bed. I should have locked the door and waited until morning. But instead, I went down the hall one step at a time. The old wooden floor creaked under my weight, every sound echoing louder than it should have. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the humming stopped. The only light came from the kitchen, where the glow of the fridge barely reached across the floor. My eyes adjusted, and I noticed something odd. The basement door was open, just slightly. Now, we never used the basement. It was mostly storage and old furniture, and the air down there always smelled like damp wood and dust. But that door had been closed, I was sure of it. The humming started again, faintly from below. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and stepped closer, telling myself over and over that this was crazy, that maybe a pipe was making noise, or the baby monitor was picking up interference again. But when I leaned toward the basement door, I heard something that made my stomach twist. Whispering. Two voices, overlapping softly, like a conversation happening just out of reach. One was low, almost a mumble. The other was lighter, female. I strained to make out the words, but all I could catch was a phrase, repeated twice. "She's perfect." My chest tightened. I stood there for what felt like forever, frozen at the top of those stairs. The whispering stopped. Then something scraped against the concrete floor below. And then, 3 slow, heavy knocks echoed up the stairs, each one louder than the last. I stepped back instinctively, heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. The door creaked, moving just a little wider on its own. I caught a glimpse of darkness so complete, it felt like it was pulling the light toward it. That's when I heard the monitor upstairs click back on, and Lily started to cry. I ran up the stairs faster than I thought I could move. My feet barely touched the steps. The crying grew louder, high-pitched and desperate, echoing through the hallway. When I burst into the nursery, the room was dim and cold. The window was open, just a crack, but enough for the curtains to shift softly with the breeze. I hadn't opened that window. I know I hadn't. Lily was thrashing in her crib, her tiny fists clenched, her face red and wet with tears. I scooped her up instantly, holding her close against my chest. Her body was trembling. So was mine. "It's okay," I whispered, though my own voice shook. "It's okay, baby." I'm here. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the hallway reflection from the baby monitor screen. A shadow, tall, standing perfectly still by the doorway. I spun around. Nothing. Just the empty hall and the faint creak of the floorboards settling. I wanted to believe that's all it was, but I knew what I saw. For the rest of the night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the nursery chair, rocking Lily, staring at that doorway. Every now and then, I'd hear a soft sound from downstairs. Not quite footsteps, more like dragging, or maybe something shifting against the floor. Morning came eventually. The sunlight didn't make me feel any safer. When I finally got the nerve to check the basement, I found the door wide open. A few old boxes had been moved, like someone or something had been searching through them, and right in the middle of the floor, there was one of Lily's pacifiers, the same one she'd lost weeks ago. I never found out how it got there. We moved out of that house 2 months later. My wife still doesn't know the full story. I told her it was just my paranoia, that I was tired from late nights with the baby. But sometimes, when I check the baby monitor now, even in our new home, I'll see something strange. A faint outline behind the crib, like someone standing there, watching quietly. It always disappears when I blink. But once, just once, I swear I heard it again. A soft voice coming through the monitor, whispering the same words that still make my skin crawl. She's perfect. I still can't decide if I was just exhausted or if something else was really in that house with us. My wife had just given birth to our son, Adam. He was only a few weeks old at the time, and I remember those nights being a blur of half sleep and crying. We had just moved into a small rental home on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but quiet. At least, that's what we thought. The first strange thing started with the baby monitor. We bought one of those basic audio ones, just sound, no camera. Every now and then, when Adam cried, there would be this faint static underneath his voice. Not unusual, I told myself. Old wiring, maybe some interference. But some nights, when I'd be downstairs doing dishes or scrolling through my phone, I'd hear something else through it, soft humming, a tune I didn't recognize. It wasn't my wife. She was always asleep by then. At first, I brushed it off. You start hearing all kinds of things when you're half awake and running on caffeine. But one night, the humming got louder. It sounded closer to the monitor than Adam's crib was supposed to be, like someone was right next to it. I ran upstairs, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I opened the nursery door, Adam was asleep, completely still. The air felt cold, colder than the rest of the house. I remember that clearly because it hit my skin like a chill breeze. The window was shut, but the mobile above his crib was slowly spinning, the little plastic stars turning without a sound. I stood there for a while, just staring, listening to the faint click of the monitor's static. The next morning, I told my wife. She laughed it off, said maybe I'd been dreaming while standing up again. I wanted to believe her. But the thing was, that night wasn't the last time I heard it. The next few days, I started noticing small changes. Adam would wake up earlier than usual, crying harder than before. Every time I came in, he'd be staring at one specific corner of the room. Not the window, not the door, just that same empty corner near the closet. And then one night, the humming came again. Only this time, I could hear something else underneath it. A whisper, low and raspy. I couldn't make out the words, but I know I heard my son's name. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the nursery for the rest of the night, holding Adam close while keeping my eyes fixed on that corner. Every creak in the walls, every shift in the shadows made my muscles tense. The room felt wrong, like the air was thicker somehow. By morning, I convinced myself it was stress. We were new parents, sleep-deprived, still settling into a new home, but the next evening proved me wrong. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of something over the monitor again. This time, not humming, not whispers. It was breathing, slow and uneven. I thought maybe my wife had gone to check on Adam, but when I turned to her, she was still asleep beside me. The breathing grew, heavier, almost strained, like someone standing too close to the microphone. I could feel my chest tightening. I reached over, turned the monitor volume all the way down, but the sound didn't stop. It was faint, but I could still hear it, not through the speaker this time, through the house, from upstairs. I got up, moving slowly so the floor wouldn't creak. Every step toward the stairs made my stomach twist tighter. The house was silent except for that sound. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. The nursery light was on. It was a dim, warm glow, barely visible under the door. I knew I'd turned it off before going to bed. My mind started racing, trying to come up with anything, my wife, a timer maybe I'd forgotten. But no, I checked it. I was sure of it. I climbed the stairs, one hand gripping the rail to stop myself from shaking. When I reached the door, I pressed my ear against it. The breathing had stopped. Total silence. I waited, holding my breath. Then, out of nowhere, a faint giggle. A baby's giggle. For a split second, I felt relief, until I remembered Adam's laugh. It wasn't like that. His laugh was soft, broken up by tiny hiccups. The one I heard through the door was low, deliberate, almost practiced. I pushed the door open. The light flickered once. The crib was empty. My heart stopped. I looked everywhere. Under the crib, the small changing table, the closet, but Adam wasn't there. I started shouting his name, loud enough that my wife woke up and ran in. She found me kneeling on the floor, panicking, barely able to speak. And then, just as she screamed his name too, we heard crying from the hallway. Adam was lying just outside the nursery door. He was lying on the floor, completely still except for the rise and fall of his tiny chest. His face was red from crying, his little fists clenched tight. My wife grabbed him immediately, holding him close and whispering his name over and over. I checked the hallway, the stairs, every room upstairs, but no one was there. Every window was still locked. Nothing looked touched. We didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, we checked the baby monitor recordings. Ours had a feature that stored audio for the past 24 hours. I didn't want to, but my wife insisted. At first, it was normal. Adam's soft coos, the sound of us walking in and out. Then, around 2:03 a.m., the breathing started again. Louder this time, almost right next to the mic. Then came something else, barely audible under the static. A voice, whispering. It said Adam's name, twice, slowly, like someone testing how it sounded. Then there was a faint dragging sound, like cloth brushing against the floor, followed by that same soft laugh I'd heard before the light flickered. And right after that, the sound of the crib creaking. I shut the monitor off before the recording could finish. I couldn't listen to it anymore. That day, I called a locksmith, a security installer, and even the police. They checked the entire house, found no sign of forced entry, no prints, no footprints, nothing. It made no sense. We moved out a few weeks later. We didn't sell the house, we just left it and started renting somewhere else. I couldn't step into that nursery again. My wife agreed. But sometimes, when I rock Adam to sleep, I swear I still hear it. The faint hum from the baby monitor. Even though we got rid of it months ago, it's quiet, distant, but familiar. The same tune that played that night. And every time I hear it, Adam stops crying. He just looks past me, toward the corner of the room, and smiles. 2 years ago, not long after my daughter turned 3, I still can't explain what we experienced, and I'm not sure I even want to. My wife and I had just moved into a small house outside of town. It wasn't anything fancy, but it had a big yard and an old oak tree that our daughter, Lily, loved to play under. For the first few months, everything was peaceful. She'd spend hours talking to her dolls or drawing pictures on the kitchen floor while I worked in the living room. It felt normal, happy even. Then, around late November, she started waking up at night. At first, it was just crying. Loud, panicked sobs in the middle of the night. I'd run into her room and find her standing in her crib, trembling and pointing at the corner. When I asked what was wrong, she'd just say, "He's watching me." I assumed it was just a nightmare. Kids have wild imaginations, and the shadows from the trees outside could look strange in the dark. But she kept saying the same thing every night. "He's watching me." Always the same tone, always pointing to the same corner. One night, I sat with her until she fell asleep. I left a small nightlight plugged in by her dresser to make her feel safer. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the faint sound of whispering through the baby monitor. It wasn't crying. It sounded like she was talking to someone. Her voice was soft, almost calm. I remember thinking it was odd that she wasn't scared. I turned the monitor's volume up and heard her say, "No, you can't come inside." Then silence. My chest tightened as I got out of bed. The house was still. No wind, no creaking floors, just the faint hum of the heater. I walked down the hall and opened her door quietly. The nightlight was still glowing, faint and orange. Lily was sitting in her crib, eyes wide open, facing the same dark corner she always pointed to. I asked, "Who are you talking to?" She didn't answer. Her head turned toward me slowly, and she said in a whisper, "He's gone now." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The air in the room felt different, heavier somehow. I picked her up and her skin was cold like she'd been standing outside. I didn't see anything in that corner. Nothing but her toys, a small rocking chair, and the glow from the nightlight flickering against the wall. That was the first night I really started to feel uneasy in the house. The next day, I checked the monitor footage. It only recorded short clips triggered by sound or motion. There was one video from around 1:57 a.m. I pressed play. The screen showed Lily sitting up, looking toward the corner. She tilted her head slightly, like she was listening to someone. Then, the rocking chair in the corner began to move, slowly, back and forth, and she whispered something I couldn't hear. When the clip ended, I just sat there staring at the blank screen, my heart pounding. I told myself there had to be some logical explanation. Maybe I'd left a window cracked. Maybe air currents moved the chair. But I couldn't shake the sound of her voice from that recording, the calmness in it. It didn't sound like fear. It sounded like she knew whoever or whatever was there. For the next few nights, I tried everything I could think of. I checked the windows, sealed every draft, even moved the rocking chair into the hallway. Still, every night around 2 a.m., Lily would start whispering again. Sometimes she laughed softly. Sometimes she said things like, "That's not nice," or "You can't come in." It was around this time my wife started noticing changes too. She said Lily's toys were being moved at night, placed in odd spots across the room, like a trail leading to the door. One morning, she found Lily's favorite stuffed rabbit sitting on the kitchen counter, facing the window. No one remembered putting it there. We were exhausted. I started sleeping with the monitor in my hand, listening for any sound. Most nights, it stayed quiet until exactly 1:58 a.m. That's when I'd hear a faint scratching, not from inside her room. No, it sounded like it was coming from outside near her window. The first time I heard it, my stomach dropped. It wasn't the kind of scratching you hear from a tree branch. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like fingernails dragging slowly across glass. I rushed into her room, but by the time I got there, the sound had stopped. Lily was awake though, sitting up and staring toward the window. When I asked what she saw, she said, "He's closer now." That night, I barely slept. The next day, I checked the outside of the window. There were faint marks on the glass, 5 of them, uneven and long, like someone had pressed their hand against it. I tried brushing them off, but they didn't come off easily. It looked almost like oil or residue from skin. I scrubbed until my hands hurt. That evening, I nailed the window shut. I didn't care about ventilation. I just wanted her safe. The house started to feel wrong after that. I'd catch shadows moving in my peripheral vision or hear faint breathing when I passed her room at night. My wife said she felt someone watching her when she did laundry in the basement. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps, slow, heavy, on the wooden floor just outside our bedroom. At first, I thought it was my wife, but she was still next to me, asleep. My heart was hammering. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer and stepped out into the hallway. The light flickered as I scanned the floor. Nothing, just silence. Then I heard the baby monitor crackle. A soft whisper came through. It was Lily's voice, but she wasn't crying this time. She was shushing someone. I sprinted down the hall. When I burst into her room, my breath caught in my throat. She was sitting cross-legged in bed, eyes wide, staring at the closet door. The closet was open, just a few inches, but enough for me to see the darkness inside. I asked, "What's in there?" She didn't blink, didn't even look at me. She just said, "He said you shouldn't have closed the window." The closet door creaked, just slightly, like something had brushed against it from the inside. That was enough. I grabbed her, ran back to our room, and locked the door. My wife woke up, terrified, as I pushed the dresser against the handle. We sat there for hours, listening. The floorboards creaked a few times, but nothing else. No voices, no breathing, just silence that somehow felt worse than the noise. By morning, the closet door was fully open, and the nails I'd hammered into the window frame were lying neatly on the floor. After that morning, everything changed. Lily refused to sleep in her room. Every time we tried, she'd scream and cry until she was shaking. We let her sleep with us for a while, thinking maybe it would pass, but she never mentioned the man again. She just got quieter, distant, like she was always listening for something. I started setting up cameras, one in her room, one in the hallway, and one outside facing her window. I didn't tell my wife at first. I just needed to see. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. For a few nights, nothing happened, just static and us moving around the house. Then, on the fourth night, around 2 a.m., I caught something. The camera outside her window flickered, and for half a second, just half a second, I saw what looked like a reflection, a pale outline of a face pressed against the glass. The shape vanished so quickly, I thought maybe it was a glitch. But the next morning, when I checked the window, there was that same oily handprint again. Only this time, there were two. One large, one small. I didn't tell my wife. I couldn't. She was already scared enough. But that night, I moved Lily's bed into our room for good. Weeks passed. The house felt lighter at first, like whatever had been happening was behind us. But then, small things started again. A toy car rolling out of the closet by itself. The sound of light tapping coming from the walls. Lily waking up in the middle of the night, whispering, "He's looking for his daughter." That line made me freeze, because I had never told her about the second handprint. I checked the cameras again. This time, something else showed up. Around 1:58 a.m., the one in the hallway caught movement. Someone, or something, was standing just at the edge of Lily's old bedroom door. The shape didn't move. It just stood there. And then, slowly, the head tilted, like it was listening to the sound of the monitor. That was the last night we stayed in that house. We packed up the next morning and left everything behind. We moved to an apartment in the city. I sold the house a few months later. But even now, sometimes I wake up around 2 a.m. without knowing why, my heart racing, my ears straining to hear something that isn't there. Last week, I went to check on Lily before bed. She was asleep, hugging that same stuffed rabbit. I smiled, relieved. But when I closed the door, I heard it. A faint, slow scratching on her window. I ran over, yanked the curtain open. Nothing there. Just my reflection staring back. But then I saw it, clear as day, on the cold glass. Two handprints, one large, one small, and this time, they were on the inside. That night, it was supposed to be an easy assignment. Guard duty at the old precinct before it got demolished. The building had been shut down for years after a flood damaged half the foundation. Still, the department wanted someone on site overnight to keep vandals out. They picked me. Rookie mistake, saying I didn't mind the graveyard shift. The place was falling apart. Cracked floors, paint peeling from the walls, and that damp smell you only get in old basements. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness, and every step echoed like I was walking through a cave. There was no power, just a single portable lamp I set up by the front desk. I checked the doors, the windows, everything. Quiet. Too quiet. Around midnight, the wind started picking up outside, and I could hear the metal sign banging loosely against the wall. I was sitting by the desk, half asleep, when I heard it. A soft thud from one of the holding cells in the back. At first, I ignored it. Probably a rat or a loose pipe. But then it came again. 3 knocks. Slow, even. I grabbed my flashlight and started down the hallway. The beam bounced off the cracked tiles, lighting up the old lineup room, the empty offices, and finally, the holding area. All the cell doors were rusted open except one, the last one on the left. It was shut. That didn't make sense. I had checked them all earlier. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I expected. "This building's restricted. Who's in there?" No answer. I moved closer, each step slower than the last. My heart was pounding hard enough to drown out the sound of the wind outside. When I reached the cell, I saw something strange. The old metal door was locked from the inside. Then came the whisper, faint, raspy, right behind the door. "Officer, please." I froze. The air turned cold. Whoever it was knew I was a cop. But this building had been empty for years. I stood there for a good 10 seconds, just staring at that door. My hand was shaking, the flashlight trembling slightly against the metal bars. I tried to sound steady when I spoke. "Who's in there?" I said. "Identify yourself." No answer. Just silence. Then, that same whisper again, lower this time. Please, let me out. The voice was muffled but desperate. I leaned closer, trying to see through the small slot in the door, but it was too dark inside. My flashlight barely reached past the bars. I could see the faint outline of something moving, but I couldn't tell if it was a person or just my mind playing tricks. This building's been empty for years, I said, almost to myself. How the hell? That's when I heard it. A metallic clink, like chains scraping against the floor, followed by breathing. Deep, uneven breaths echoing off the concrete walls. My chest tightened. I knew that sound didn't belong in an abandoned building. I backed away slowly and reached for my radio. Unit 12 to dispatch, I said. I'm at the old precinct on Latham. Possible trespasser in custody, cell 3. Requesting backup. The radio crackled, then went dead. I tried again, nothing but static. Then, faintly through the interference, I thought I heard something. A voice, my name, whispered in the same tone as before. That's when the door started to rattle. At first, it was soft, just a gentle shake. Then it got louder, harder, like someone was slamming their fists against it from the inside. The whole cell block vibrated with the noise. I backed up, gun drawn, yelling for whoever it was to stop. The banging suddenly ceased. Complete silence again. Then a sound came from the other end of the hall, another cell door closing. Every empty cell was slamming shut, one by one, until the entire row was sealed. I could feel the vibration under my boots. I ran for the exit, flashlight jerking wildly across the walls. But when I reached the front desk again, something caught my eye. The lamp I'd left burning was off, and on the dusty counter beside it were 3 sets of handprints. Small, wet, like they'd just been pressed there. I stood frozen in front of that desk, staring at those wet handprints. They were too fresh, too real. I could see the tiny ridges of the fingerprints, streaks of water running down the edge of the counter like someone had just lifted their hands away seconds ago. My flashlight flickered again, and for a split second, I saw movement in the reflection of the glass door. Someone standing behind me. I spun around, gun raised, but there was nothing there. Just the empty lobby, shadows stretching across the floor. That's when I noticed the smell. Damp, metallic, almost like blood mixed with rainwater. It seemed to come from the hallway I'd just run from. I aimed the light toward it, and there they were. Wet footprints, bare, small, leading from the holding cells straight toward the front desk. They stopped right where I was standing. My breathing got shallow, the flashlight shaking in my hand. I kept telling myself this had to be a prank, that maybe some kids had broken in, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The air felt wrong, heavy, like the whole building was holding its breath again. I turned to leave. I wasn't staying another second. But before I reached the door, my radio came back to life, crackling faintly. Unit 12, come in. It was dispatch. I grabbed it instantly. This is Unit 12. I need immediate backup at the old precinct. There's someone... The radio cut out again, but this time, through the static, I heard something else. Not dispatch. Not a voice from outside. It was a man's voice. Low, calm. Cell 3, still occupied. Then silence. I ran out to the car, jumped in, and drove until the old precinct was just a shadow in the rearview mirror. I didn't even report it right away. Who would believe me? The next day, I told my supervisor what happened. They checked the site. Every door was still locked. No signs of anyone breaking in, but they did find something strange in the report. In the old records, Cell 3 had been sealed after a suspect hanged himself there back in 1998. When I looked at the file photo, I felt my stomach twist. The man's name was the same one I heard over the radio that night. And the timestamp on the photo, it was taken at 2:30 a.m., the exact time I got that first knock.
I was working dispatch for the police department, covering the overnight shift. It was one of those quiet nights where nothing really happens. No fights, no break-ins, just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the sound of my own typing. Around 2 a.m., the phone rang. At first, I thought it was a prank. The line was full of static, and I could barely make out anything but faint breathing. I said, 911, what's your emergency? And there was a pause. Then a voice, a woman's voice trembling, whispered, he's inside. That was all I could understand before the call cut off. I tried calling the number back, but it went straight to dead air. I ran a trace on it, expecting it to be a bad signal or a misdial, but the address it pulled up made my stomach turn. It was an old house on Dunbar Road. The one that had been vacant for over 10 years since the whole family living there died in a home invasion. The case had never been solved. I called it into patrol. Officer Hernandez and I were the only ones on duty in that district, so I told him to head over. I stayed on the line, monitoring his radio feed. He got there about 10 minutes later. I could hear his footsteps through his body cam mic as he went up the front steps. He said, "Dispatch, I'm at the residence. Lights are off, doors slightly open." I told him to wait for backup, but he didn't. I could hear the creak of the door as he pushed it open. The feed was faint, static cutting in and out, but I could still hear the sound of his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Then he said something that sent chills down my spine. "Dispatch, someone's upstairs. I can hear them crying." I leaned closer to the speaker, holding my breath. "Hernandez, confirm. You said you hear someone upstairs?" Static. Then faintly, "It's a woman. I think she's hurt." The line went silent after that. I called his name over the radio again and again, but there was no response. Just the soft hiss of static and the faint hum of interference. My palms were sweating. I kept thinking maybe his mic had cut out. Maybe he just lost signal in the house. Still, something in his tone before the line went dead. It didn't sound right. I radioed for backup from a neighboring unit, but it would take at least 15 minutes for them to reach the area. So I kept the line open, listening for anything. Then about 2 minutes later, the audio came back, faint at first, the sound of boots moving slowly across the floor. I said, "Hernandez, can you hear me?" No answer. I heard him breathing though. Deep, uneven, like he was whispering to himself. Then his voice came through, low and shaky. "Dispatch, she's here." I froze. "Copy that. Describe the subject." Silence. Then, "She's standing at the end of the hallway. She's looking at me." I could hear him step closer, the mic picking up every creak of the floorboards. Then a long pause. I waited for him to say something else, but instead I heard another voice. A whisper, close to his mic. "Why did you come back?" It wasn't his voice. It was female, soft and distant, almost like it came from the other end of the line instead of through his body cam. I felt my heart jump. I said, "Hernandez, get out of there now. Do you copy? Get out." No answer. The feed filled with static again, but behind it, I could hear faint noises. Footsteps running, the sound of a door slamming, then heavy breathing. For a few seconds, it sounded like he was sprinting through the house. Then everything went quiet. The last thing the mic picked up before cutting out completely was a soft, muffled cry. A woman's voice again. But this time she wasn't whispering. She was laughing. Backup finally arrived about 10 minutes later. By then, I was already outside the house, pacing beside my cruiser, trying not to lose it. The front porch light flickered in an erratic rhythm, buzzing like a dying insect. I warned the other officers that we lost contact with Hernandez and that the body cam feed was corrupted. We went in together, weapons drawn, flashlights cutting through the dust and darkness. The first thing that hit us was the smell. Damp wood, old decay, and something metallic underneath, like rust or blood. The living room looked exactly like the reports described. Furniture draped in sheets, floor covered in broken glass, wallpaper peeling in long strips. We called out for Hernandez. No response. Then we started clearing each room, one by one. The last door was at the end of the hallway, the same place he said he saw her. The doorknob was ice cold, even through my gloves. When we opened it, the room was empty. Just a rocking chair in the middle, slowly moving back and forth even though the windows were shut. My partner checked the closet while I scanned the corners. That's when my radio crackled. It was Hernandez's voice, static, then a whisper. "Don't go down." I froze. My partner heard it too. He asked, "Go down where?" Before I could answer, we both heard a low creak, like something shifting beneath the floorboards. My flashlight beam caught a small wooden hatch near the bed, a basement entrance. We pried it open, and the smell hit us like a wave. Thick, heavy, impossible to describe. I pointed my light down the narrow stairs. The beam landed on the concrete floor below, and there he was, Hernandez, standing perfectly still, facing the corner. I called his name, but he didn't move. When we finally got down there, We realized his radio was off. His body cam light was still blinking, recording. But when we turned him around, his face was blank, eyes open, unfocused, like he was seeing something we couldn't. He whispered just once, barely audible. "She said you'd come too." The lights above us flickered, then went black, and in that moment of silence, something in the dark took a single step toward us, then another. It was one of those shifts that started off too quiet, the kind where you can feel something coming, but you don't know what. I'd been on the force for about 5 years at that point, working nights in a small town that didn't see much action beyond bar fights and noise complaints. Around 2:30 in the morning, the radio cracked to life with a 911 dispatch. A woman screaming for help from an abandoned farmhouse out on Miller Road. We'd had calls from that area before, usually teenagers trying to scare each other or drunk drivers who lost their way. But this one sounded different. The dispatcher said she could still hear the woman whispering, "He's in the house," over and over, until the line went dead. I remember the drive out there. The roads were empty, the fog was thick, and the only sound was the low hum of my engine. When I pulled up, the place looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. The windows were boarded up, the porch half collapsed, and the front door hung crooked on one hinge. I radioed in that I'd arrived and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The air felt colder than it should have been. I could see my breath. Every step on that porch made the wood creak loud enough to echo through the night. Inside, it was worse. The smell of rot and dust filled the air. My flashlight beam caught old furniture, claw marks on the walls, and a shattered mirror leaning against the hallway. I called out, "Police department, is anyone here?" No response, just the distant sound of dripping water somewhere deeper in the house. Then I heard it, a soft, uneven tapping from upstairs. It wasn't the sound of footsteps. It was slower, almost deliberate, like someone running their fingers across the wall as they moved. I called it in again, but the radio only gave static. That's when I noticed something faint on the staircase. A set of wet footprints, bare feet, leading up, and the air grew colder still. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, flashlight trembling in my hand. My heart was hammering in my chest, and every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I couldn't. That woman's voice, or whatever I thought I heard over the radio, kept echoing in my mind. "He's in the house." I took the first step, then another. The wood groaned under my weight, and the sound of dripping water seemed louder, closer. The footprints led up the stairs, stopping halfway, then continuing along the landing. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating peeling wallpaper and broken picture frames. I could see the faint outline of a hallway stretching ahead, doors lining each side. Then I heard it again, soft whispering breaths coming from one of the doors at the far end. I froze, listening. The sound wasn't human. It was deliberate, almost like someone was mimicking breathing. My pulse shot through the roof, my palms slick with sweat. I called out, "Come out! Police!" My voice sounded small and weak against the oppressive silence. No answer. I approached the door slowly. Each step made the floor creak under me, and I could swear the shadows along the hallway seemed to shift, like something was moving just beyond my sight. I raised my flashlight and peered through the cracked frame. The room was empty, just dust, broken furniture, and a single rocking chair that slowly rocked back and forth as if someone had just stood up. I backed away, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched. That's when the whisper came again, closer this time, right behind me. I spun, flashlight trembling, and caught a glimpse of something standing in the corner, pale, motionless, featureless in the dark. My lungs seized. I couldn't tell if it was a person, a shadow, or something else entirely. I stumbled backward, nearly falling down the stairs, and ran for the front door. The old wood groaned beneath me, and the house seemed to breathe around me. When I reached the porch, my flashlight flickered and went out. Complete darkness. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket, but that's when I heard it, the whispering again. Not coming from the house, but from my own radio, which I hadn't turned on. "Why did you come back?" I froze. I bolted for my patrol car and slammed the door shut. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the key into the ignition. When the engine finally turned over, the headlights hit the farmhouse, and for just a second, I saw someone, or something, standing in the upstairs window, still watching. I radioed in again, trying to reach dispatch. This time, the line clicked through. Unit 12, what's your status? I didn't even know what to say. My voice cracked as I told them what happened, leaving out the part about the figure in the window. Backup was already on the way. 2 other officers arrived 15 minutes later. We went back inside together. Every room was searched top to bottom, but nothing was there. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, not even the rocking chair I'd seen moving. Just dust and silence. They said the radio interference might have been from the old wiring in the area. The wet footprints? Probably condensation from a leak in the ceiling. They had explanations for everything, except for the voice. The next morning, I stopped by dispatch to ask for the 911 recording from that night. I wanted to hear the woman's call again, maybe to prove to myself that it actually happened. The dispatcher looked confused when I mentioned it. She said there was no active 911 call from Miller Road logged in the system. Nothing after midnight. I insisted I'd heard it. She humored me and checked the backup recordings anyway. After a few minutes, she found one file, a corrupted entry timestamped 2:32 a.m. The audio was distorted and muffled, but you could hear faint breathing and a woman's trembling voice saying, "Please help me. He's here." Then there was silence. And right before the file cut out, another voice came through, a whisper, low and rasping. It said my name. The dispatcher froze, staring at me. "That's you, isn't it?" she asked quietly. "Why would someone say your name?" I didn't answer. I just walked out, my chest tight, my heart pounding. I've driven past that farmhouse a few times since. The boards are gone now, the windows are clean. But sometimes when I'm parked on Miller Road late at night, my radio crackles to life for just a second, and I hear a voice that sounds exactly like mine say, "He's still here." I was working late patrol in a part of town I usually avoided. Streets so quiet you could hear the wind through the trees. Around 1:45 a.m., my radio crackled with a 911 call. But there was nothing on the line except heavy breathing and faint static. I called back, "911, are you there?" And the line went dead. I checked the dispatch logs. No call had come in, no number registered. I shrugged it off, told myself maybe it was a prank or a pocket dial. But when I drove toward the reported address, a long-abandoned apartment building on the edge of town, my stomach sank. The building was dark, windows boarded up, graffiti covering the doors, but something felt wrong. I parked my cruiser on the street and stepped out. The air was heavy and cold, the kind of cold that seeps through your uniform and sticks to your bones. Every step on the cracked sidewalk echoed in the still night. I could hear faint shuffling above me, like someone moving on the broken wooden floors inside. I radioed in, saying I was investigating, but static answered me instead. I forced myself to open the front door. It creaked so loud I winced. Inside, dust hung in the air, illuminated by my flashlight's narrow beam. The stairs to the upper floors loomed ahead, warped and groaning under the weight of nothing. I took the first step, and the floor seemed to moan beneath me. The smell of mildew and decay filled my nose. Then I heard it. A whisper, so faint I almost convinced myself it was in my head. "Please," it said. The voice was female, soft but laced with terror. I froze. My heart jumped, my chest tightening. The radio static buzzed louder, like it was reacting to the sound. I climbed the stairs slowly, each creak and groan making me flinch. I kept telling myself it was an old building settling, but the whispers continued, coming from a hallway at the far end. My flashlight flickered, and I thought I saw movement, shadows shifting just beyond the beam. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't. The voice called again, "Help me!" This time clearer, right behind me. I spun around. Nothing, just darkness. And then I realized the hallway had changed. Doors that weren't there before now lined the walls, all slightly ajar, like the building was waiting for me. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. I told myself it was exhaustion or the isolation of the streets, but the air felt heavier now, and the whispers didn't stop. Every step I took down the hallway made my boots echo like gunshots. My flashlight flickered, cutting the shadows into jagged shapes that moved just beyond my vision. The doors all seemed the same, worn wood with rusted handles, but each one whispered something different as I passed. Faint words, soft and hurried, impossible to catch. "Please, don't leave. He's here." My chest tightened with every step. My breathing came in short, uneven bursts. My heart hammered so loud I was afraid it would give me away to whatever was in the dark. Then I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, following each of my steps. I spun, gun drawn, shining the flashlight over every door. Nothing. Empty hallway. My own footsteps sounded too loud, too heavy. I told myself it was a rat, or maybe a loose floorboard, but the footsteps continued, not echoing mine, separate, steady. I reached the last door at the end of the hall. The whispering was louder now, urgent, as if calling me closer. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I raised my hand and pushed the door open with the butt of my flashlight. The room was empty. Dust motes floated in the beam, swirling in the cold, stale air. A single chair sat in the center, facing the wall. The whispers stopped. Silence. I exhaled, but then something made me freeze. A soft click came from behind me. The door slammed shut. I spun, slammed my hands against it. Locked. My radio crackled to life on its own. Through the static, I could hear it. The same voice. Clear, calm. My name. I tried to open the door, my hands shaking, panic rising. The room felt smaller now, the shadows closer. Then the chair creaked, moving slowly toward me. My flashlight flickered, and I caught it. A pale figure standing behind the chair, motionless. I screamed and kicked at the door. Nothing. The radio hissed, and the figure didn't move. But I could feel it watching, breathing, waiting. I ran for the window, yanking at the frame. It wouldn't budge. My hands were raw. My chest burned. The whispers started again, all around me this time. I realized I wasn't alone. The next thing I remember is being outside. My hands were bleeding, my knees scraped. My cruiser lights were still flashing, though I didn't remember turning them on. My radio was silent again, not even static. I stumbled toward the car, shaking, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what had happened inside. When I called dispatch, my voice cracked. I told them I'd investigated a 911 call from the old apartment building and that I'd been attacked. Backup arrived 20 minutes later. 3 officers searched the entire building from top to bottom. Every floor, every room, even the basement. Nothing. No footprints, no chair, no sign that anyone had been there in years. They said I must have fallen, hit my head. The cuts on my hands were explained away as splinters from the old doors. The dispatcher checked the system, but there was no record of a 911 call at 1:45 a.m. None at all. I knew what I heard. I knew I wasn't imagining it, but no one believed me. A few nights later, I went back on shift. I told myself I was fine, that it was just stress. Around the same time, 1:45 a.m., the radio crackled again. I froze. The same static, the same faint breathing, then the same voice. "Help me," it said, almost like a whisper in my ear. I felt my stomach drop. I switched the radio off. The next morning, I went to the station early and listened to the call logs myself. There was one entry, a corrupted audio file, time-stamped exactly at 1:45 a.m. When I played it, the sound was muffled, distant. A woman's voice trembling. "He's in the hall," she said. "Please help me." Then a man's voice came through. Calm, steady. It was mine. "Ma'am, stay where you are," I said on the recording. "I'm coming to get you." But I never said those words. I never answered that call. That's when I noticed something else. The timestamp was from 2 weeks before my shift. The same day another officer, a rookie, went missing while investigating the exact same building. They found his patrol car outside, engine still running. He was never found. And every time the radio crackles at night, I still hear him breathing.
I still check my windows before I go to sleep. I used to think stalkers were just stories, something that happened to other people. But after what I went through, I'm not so sure that's what it was anymore. At the time, I was living alone in a small apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet and cheap. The kind of place where you could hear every creak in the floor and every car that passed by outside. For the first few months, I actually liked it. Until one night, around 2 a.m., I heard someone knock on my window. Not loud, just a soft, deliberate. My window faced the parking lot, and my first thought was maybe one of my neighbors needed help. But when I peeked through the blinds, there was no one there. The air outside was still, the lot empty except for my car under the flickering streetlight. I told myself it was a branch, or maybe just the wind, and eventually went back to bed. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, same sound. This time, I didn't look. I just lay there, frozen, listening. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I could tell it was coming from the same spot, right by my window near the far corner. It went on for maybe a minute, then stopped. When morning came, I checked outside. There were footprints in the dirt under my window, bare feet. I told the landlord, but he brushed it off, said maybe it was a drunk person or a kid messing around. He promised to have maintenance check the lights outside, but nothing changed. The next few nights were quiet, and I started to convince myself it was over. Then one night, I got home late from work. It was raining hard, and when I unlocked my door, I noticed a small envelope wedged under the handle. It didn't have a name or stamp, just my apartment number written in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It was taken from outside my window, and in the reflection of the glass, I could see myself, lying in bed, asleep. I dropped the photo like it was burning my fingers. My stomach twisted, and for a few seconds, I just stood there, staring at it on the floor. My apartment suddenly felt too small, too quiet. I checked the locks 3 times, closed all the curtains, and sat with my back against the wall until sunrise. The next morning, I called the police. They came by, took the photo, and said they'd look into it. But from the look on their faces, I could tell they didn't take it seriously. They said I should install cameras and maybe stay with a friend for a while. So I bought one of those cheap motion-activated cameras and set it up facing the window. That night, I tried to sleep, but every sound made me jolt awake. The rain had stopped, but there was this strange hum outside, like the distant buzz of an electrical wire. Around 2:10 a.m., my phone pinged. The camera had detected movement. My hands were shaking when I opened the app. The live feed was blurry, but I could see someone standing in the corner of the parking lot, just at the edge of the light. They weren't moving, just standing there, facing my window. I zoomed in as much as I could, but the image broke into static. Then, without warning, the screen went completely black. I froze. A second later, I heard that same tap on my window. This time, it was louder, more deliberate. I didn't move. I just sat there on the floor, holding my breath. The tapping stopped, but then I heard something else. Breathing. Slow, heavy breathing coming from the other side of the glass. I forced myself to peek through the curtain, just enough to see a shape outside. A tall figure, too still to be natural. I couldn't make out a face, just the outline of a head and shoulders. Then it leaned closer to the window, almost pressing against it. The glass started to fog slightly, as if from warm breath. I backed away slowly and grabbed my phone, trying to call 911, but before I could dial, the figure moved, not walking away, crawling across the wall, up toward the roof. I don't remember dropping the phone, but I must have, because when I came to my senses, it was lying on the floor, the screen still glowing. I could hear something above me, faint scraping sounds on the ceiling, like nails dragging across metal. I didn't know what to do. If I ran outside, I'd have to pass under whatever that thing was. If I stayed, I'd be trapped. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I tried to convince myself it was just someone messing with me, maybe some sick prank. But deep down, I knew the movements I saw weren't human. The noise stopped. For a few seconds, everything was silent again. Then came a single thud from inside the apartment, not outside. Inside, it came from the kitchen. I could see it from where I was sitting, a dim shape in the dark. My breathing went shallow. I slowly reached for the flashlight on my phone and turned it on. There was nothing there, just the fridge, the counter, and my back door, wide open. I swear I locked that door. The cold air rushed in, carrying the faint smell of rain and dirt. I took one hesitant step toward it, and that's when I saw the muddy footprints, bare footprints, leading from the doorway all the way to where I was standing. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut and locking it again. Then I ran to my car, didn't even grab my keys, just ran. I stayed at a friend's place that night. The next morning, I went back with a police officer. My window was open, my camera was gone, and there was one thing left behind on my kitchen counter. Another photograph. It was me again, only this time, it wasn't taken from outside the window. It was taken from inside my apartment. That was 2 years ago. I've moved twice since then. Changed numbers, got new locks and cameras. But sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I still hear it. The faint tapping sound on my window. And I don't look anymore. Because deep down, I think he's still watching. At the time, I was living alone in a small apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I worked late shifts at a coffee shop, so I'd usually get home around midnight, heat up leftovers, and unwind for a bit before bed. Nothing unusual ever happened there, until that one week. It started subtly. I noticed small things first, a feeling that someone was behind me when I walked to my car after work. The faint sound of footsteps echoing a little too perfectly with mine. Every time I'd turn around, the street would be empty, just the dim yellow glow of the lamps stretching over cracked pavement. One night, I got home and found my front door unlocked. I froze in the doorway, keys still in my hand. I was sure I had locked it that morning. My stomach dropped, and I stood there for a full minute listening. The apartment was silent, not even the hum of the fridge. I checked every room, every closet, even under the bed. Nothing. I told myself I must have been tired, distracted. But something about the air felt different that night, like the space around me was being watched. The next evening, I got home around midnight again. As I was parking, I saw something in my window, just a faint silhouette, like someone standing there, perfectly still. My lights were off inside. I blinked, and the shape was gone. My first thought was that someone had broken in. My second thought was that maybe I was just imagining it. I sat in the car for 5 minutes, staring at that dark window, trying to convince myself to go inside. When I finally did, the apartment was empty again. But then I noticed something that made my hands start to shake. On the table by the couch, there was a photo, a printed photo of me, taken from outside the window. I didn't have a printer. I don't know how long I stood there staring at that photo. My reflection in the window looked pale, almost ghostly, like the color had drained from my face. The picture wasn't blurry or random. It was sharp, clear. It had been taken from the alley across the street, right through my living room window. I was sitting on the couch in my work uniform, scrolling on my phone. My mind scrambled to find a logical explanation. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe a friend stopped by and thought it'd be funny. But who would go that far? Printing it out and leaving it inside my home. I locked every window, checked the door 3 times, and barely slept that night. Every creak, every gust of wind brushing against the glass made my chest tighten. At one point, I thought I heard the faint sound of breathing from the hallway. Slow, steady, too deliberate to be my imagination. I got up, flipped on every light, and stood there holding a kitchen knife, whispering, "Hello?" like an idiot. Nothing. The next day, I installed a new deadbolt and borrowed a small security camera from a coworker. I pointed it toward the front door and tried to shake the unease off me. But that night, it happened again. I came home late, exhausted, and as soon as I stepped into the apartment, something felt wrong. You know that feeling when the air just feels heavier, like the room's holding its breath. I glanced toward the couch, and my stomach turned. Another photo. This one was of me sleeping. Same angle, same lighting, but I was lying in bed, turned toward the wall. I felt dizzy, nauseous. That picture couldn't exist unless someone had been inside again. I didn't even turn the lights on. I grabbed my keys, bolted out, and drove to a nearby gas station. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold my phone when I called the cops. They came to check the apartment, but by the time they got there, the picture was gone. So was the first one. Nothing was stolen, no signs of forced entry. The officer told me it was probably a prank or someone you know trying to mess with you. I didn't know anyone like that. That night, I decided I wasn't sleeping there. I stayed at a friend's place. When I checked the security camera footage the next morning, my heart nearly stopped. Around 3:17 a.m., the front door opened slowly. A man stepped in, but what made my blood run cold wasn't his face. It was the way he moved, like he already knew where everything was. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight through the apartment, passing the couch, the kitchen, the hallway, until he reached my bedroom. For a long moment, he just stood there in the doorway, staring. I could only see the side of his face from the camera's angle. But there was something disturbingly calm about him. He wasn't searching or stealing. He was just watching. Then he turned toward the camera, like he knew it was there, and smiled. Just a faint, crooked smile before the screen went dark. The footage ended there. I called the police again, showed them the clip. They said they'd open a case, but the footage wasn't clear enough to identify him. They told me to stay somewhere else for a while, maybe change my locks again, maybe get a dog. So I moved. New apartment, new city, new locks. For a few weeks, things were fine. I tried not to think about it, though every time I closed my eyes, I could still see that smile. Then one morning, I went to grab my mail, and there was an unmarked envelope sitting on top of the pile. No return address, no name. Inside was a photo. It was me, standing at my new mailbox, holding that same envelope. And in the reflection of the glass door behind me, there was someone else, blurry but unmistakable, standing just a few feet away, holding a camera. I dropped everything and ran back inside. I locked the door, covered the windows, sat on the floor, and just listened. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Hours passed before I moved again. I tried showing the photo to the building manager, but he swore no one else had been near this entrance that morning. No strange visitors. No security footage of anyone matching the man from before. I don't sleep much anymore. I moved again last month, across the state this time. I keep the blinds shut, my phone face down, and every light on at night. But sometimes, when I'm sitting in the dark, I swear I can feel it. The weight of someone's gaze through the walls. And a few days ago, I found another envelope slipped under my door. I haven't opened it yet. I don't think I want to. Sometimes I tell myself it was just a string of coincidences, but deep down, I don't believe that. Back then, I had just moved into a small apartment downtown after a bad breakup. It wasn't in the nicest area, but it was cheap and quiet enough. I lived alone, which I didn't mind, at least at first. I liked the solitude, the freedom of shutting the door behind me and knowing everything inside was mine. It started with something small. One morning when I left for work, I noticed muddy footprints on the hallway floor outside my door. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor. The prints were faint, leading from the stairwell right up to my doormat, then stopping there. No prints leading away. I didn't think much of it until a few days later when I found my front door slightly open, just a crack, like someone hadn't closed it all the way. I froze in the doorway, every sound suddenly amplified. The hum of the fridge, the distant cars outside, the faint ticking of my wall clock. I checked every room, even the closets. Nothing was out of place. No broken windows, no missing items. I convinced myself I'd just been careless that morning, even though I clearly remembered locking it. A week passed before it happened again. This time, I woke up in the middle of the night to a faint creaking sound coming from the living room. I laid there, holding my breath, listening. The air felt heavy, like the whole apartment was holding its breath with me. Another creak, closer this time. I reached for my phone to turn on the flashlight, but before I could, the sound stopped. Complete silence. I waited a few more minutes before finally getting up and peeking through my bedroom door. The living room light was flickering, not off and on, just dimming slightly, like someone was walking between the bulb and the wall. When I turned the light switch, it went back to normal. I searched the whole apartment again, but nothing seemed wrong. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there, watching. The next morning, I found a small piece of paper slid under my front door. No writing on it, just a faint fingerprint smudge, like someone had pressed their thumb into the paper and left it there for me to find. At that point, I thought it might have been a prank, maybe someone in the building messing around. But that night, when I came home from work, something new waited for me. The blinds in my bedroom were open. I always kept them closed, and taped to the glass from the outside was a single Polaroid picture. It was my bedroom, taken from outside the window. I could see my bed, my nightstand, and me, asleep under the blanket. My stomach dropped the second I saw it. I remember my hands shaking so badly that I almost tore the photo trying to peel it off the glass. My first instinct was to call the police, but I hesitated. What was I supposed to tell them? That someone took a picture of me sleeping. They'd ask how the person even got close enough to my window, and I didn't have an answer. I lived on the second floor. There was no fire escape, no easy way up, just a sheer wall of brick beneath that window. I stood there staring at the glass, my reflection trembling back at me. And I swear for a moment I thought I saw someone standing across the street, just barely visible in the shadows near the alley. A tall figure, unmoving, watching. I closed the blinds and locked every window in the apartment. I even shoved a chair under the doorknob before I went to bed that night. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the building made me flinch. Every car that passed outside threw shifting shadows across the ceiling, and I found myself staring at them until my eyes burned. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a faint tapping sound. Slow, deliberate, like knuckles against glass. It was coming from the window. My body froze, but my mind raced. I told myself it was the wind, a branch, something harmless. But when I glanced toward the window, the curtain moved. Not from the breeze, like something brushed it from the other side. I sat up slowly, my heart beat so loud, I could barely hear anything else. Then, the tapping stopped. A few seconds of silence. And then, from the living room, I heard the faint sound of floorboards creaking. Someone was inside. I couldn't see the door from my bed, but I stared at that narrow strip of light spilling in from the hallway, waiting to see a shadow pass through it. My phone was on the nightstand. I reached for it as quietly as I could, but my hand was trembling so hard that the charger cable rattled. I dialed 911, whispering to the operator that someone was in my apartment. She told me to stay on the line and not to make a sound. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Then I heard it again, the creaking, this time closer. Then the softest sound of breathing, right outside my bedroom door. The operator was still talking, asking for my address, but I couldn't respond. My throat locked up. All I could do was stare at the door and listen to that breathing. Slow, steady, almost in rhythm with mine. After what felt like forever, the sound faded. The breathing stopped. I didn't dare move until I heard the knock at my door. A sharp, heavy pounding, followed by someone calling out that it was the police. They searched the whole apartment. Every closet, every corner. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. No open windows. But when one of the officers walked over to the window to check the locks, he stopped. He looked at me with this strange expression, then motioned me over. There, pressed against the outside of the glass, was a fresh handprint, smudged and oily, like someone had been watching through it. After the police left, I didn't sleep at all. I just sat on the couch with every light on, waiting for the morning to come. The city outside was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful. It was the kind that presses against your chest and makes you feel like something is waiting for you to let your guard down. The next few days were strange. Nothing else happened at first, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Walking to work, I'd catch glimpses of someone across the street, too far away to make out their face. Always tall, always wearing something dark. Sometimes I'd convince myself I was imagining it. Other times, I could feel their eyes on me so clearly that it made my skin crawl. Then one night, I came home to find my apartment door slightly open, just an inch, but I know I locked it. My stomach turned cold. I stood there in the hallway for a full minute, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, just the faint hum of the refrigerator from inside. I told myself it had to be maintenance, or the landlord. Maybe they needed to check something. But when I pushed the door open, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On my kitchen counter, right in the center, was my phone. I hadn't left it there. It had been charging in my bedroom that morning. The screen was on, showing a new video. I pressed play. The footage was shaky, grainy, but I recognized it instantly. It was me, sleeping. The angle was from inside my bedroom. I don't remember dropping the phone, but I remember the sound it made when it hit the floor. I ran straight out of the apartment and didn't stop until I reached the parking lot across the street. My hands were trembling so badly that it took me 3 tries to call the police again. When they arrived, they checked everything. No sign of anyone breaking in, no fingerprints except mine. But when they looked at the video file, it was gone, deleted, like it had never existed. The officer told me maybe I had dreamed it, that stress and lack of sleep can mess with memory. I didn't argue, I just nodded. That night, I packed a bag and went to stay with my sister. I haven't been back to that apartment since. I moved out a week later, left half my stuff behind. I didn't care. But here's the part that still gets me. A few days ago, I got a notification on my new phone, an airdrop request from an unknown device. I almost ignored it until I saw the thumbnail. It was a photo of me, sleeping in my new apartment. Sometimes I convince myself I imagined the whole thing, but then something small will happen. A sound, a shadow outside my window, and that old feeling creeps back. That crawling fear that someone is watching me. Back then, I lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a quiet place where I could work from home and keep to myself. I didn't really know my neighbors, but I liked it that way. I never thought about safety much. I mean, who would bother with me? It started with little things. A notification from my security camera saying motion was detected outside my door, but when I checked the footage, there was nothing there. Just the dim hallway light, flickering like it always did. The next night, same thing. Motion detected. No one there. Then I started noticing strange things when I came home. The doormat would be slightly off, my mail would be stacked differently, or the blinds would be half open when I knew I'd left them closed. Tiny things, almost too small to mention, but enough to make me pause every time I walked in. One night, I came home late after grabbing dinner with a friend. It was around 11, and the building was silent. My footsteps echoed in the narrow hallway. The motion light by my door flickered weakly, just barely illuminating the metal number plate. As I reached for my keys, I felt it, that feeling, like someone was standing right behind me. The air shifted, and I swear I could hear breathing. Slow, steady, not mine. My pulse jumped. My hand froze on the doorknob, and I turned around as quickly as I could. Nothing. Just the empty hallway stretching out in both directions. I stood there for a while, trying to listen past the pounding of my heartbeat in my ears. When I finally went inside, I locked the door, slid the chain in place, and tried to laugh it off. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was tired. But that night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a soft tapping sound. It was coming from the window near my bed. At first, I thought it was tree branches, or maybe a bird. But then I remembered, I lived on the 3rd floor. There were no trees anywhere near that window. I stayed completely still, barely breathing, just staring into the dark. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, like someone was testing the glass. I wanted to get up, to look, but my body refused to move. Every part of me screamed to stay still. Then it stopped, silence, and after a few seconds, something else replaced it. A faint whisper, so soft I almost thought it was the wind. But it wasn't outside. It was inside, right next to my ear. Do you see me? My blood ran cold. I turned on the light so fast I nearly knocked the lamp off the table. The room was empty. The window was shut. I sat there for the rest of the night with every light on, waiting for the sun to come up. But that was just the beginning. After that night, I couldn't relax in my own apartment. Every noise felt too sharp. Every shadow stretched too long. I started double-checking my locks, then triple-checking them. I left the lights on in the hallway and kept my phone under my pillow, just in case. A few days later, I installed a small security camera facing my window. I didn't really expect to catch anything, but it made me feel a little safer. The first 2 nights were normal, but on the 3rd night, around 2:45 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the app and froze. The footage showed my window in the dark. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a faint shadow passed across the glass. It wasn't a reflection or a branch. It was shaped like a person. They moved closer, pressing what looked like a hand against the window pane. I could see the outline of fingers, long and slow, dragging down the glass. But the worst part? The window never made a sound. No tapping, no creaking, just that silent movement. I replayed the video over and over, but the more I watched, the less sense it made. No one could reach that window without a ladder or something to stand on, and there was nothing outside for them to climb. When I went to check the next morning, the glass was perfectly clean. No prints, no smudges. That's when I started to wonder if maybe someone had a copy of my keys. The thought alone made my stomach twist. I changed the locks that afternoon, even added an extra bolt to the door. But it didn't matter. That same night, I woke up again to that sound. not tapping this time. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps coming from the living room. I held my breath, straining to listen. The sound was faint at first, almost rhythmic, like someone pacing. Then, it stopped, right outside my bedroom door. I didn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my throat. I stared at the door handle, waiting for it to turn. It never did. After what felt like hours, I finally got the courage to look. The hallway light was still on, but the living room was pitch black. I inched closer to the door, every muscle tight, and pressed my ear against it. Nothing. Just silence. When I finally opened it, the apartment was empty. I checked every corner, every closet, even under the bed. There was no one there. But when I walked past the kitchen, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The fridge door was wide open, and on the floor, right in front of it, was a wet footprint, bare, human, and facing my bedroom. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner with the lights on, clutching a kitchen knife and watching the door until the sun rose. By morning, I'd convinced myself to leave. I packed a bag, called in sick, and went to stay with a friend for a few days. I didn't tell them everything, just that I thought someone had been in my apartment. They told me I was being paranoid, that it was probably nothing. But on the fourth night, I got a message on my phone, a video, no sender, no number, just a timestamp from my own apartment. It was filmed from inside my living room. The camera was moving, slow and shaky, like someone was walking through the space. Then it turned toward the bedroom door, my bedroom door, the one I'd been sleeping behind just days before. The video stopped there, frozen on that image. I felt sick watching that video. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. I didn't understand how someone could have filmed it, how they even got inside. I hadn't given anyone my new key. I had changed every lock. I deleted the video immediately, but it didn't help. The image was burned into my mind. That dark figure standing in my apartment, inches from my bedroom door. I went back to the building the next morning with a friend. The apartment was exactly how I'd left it, except for one thing. The security camera was gone. Just the bracket where it used to be, ripped out of the wall. I reported everything to the police. They took my statement, checked the footage I'd saved from the app, and promised to send someone to look around. But a week passed, and I didn't hear anything back. When I called to follow up, they told me there was no usable evidence. The camera had stopped recording right after that first night. The video I'd received couldn't be traced to any number or device. They suggested I might have been hacked, but there's something they couldn't explain. A few nights later, while I was staying at my sister's house, I woke up to a soft notification sound. My phone buzzed with another motion alert from my old apartment camera, the one that had been removed. The feed was dark, but the system timestamp was live. Somehow, the camera was working again. The view was tilted, showing only part of the floor and the bottom of the couch. At first, I thought maybe the police had reinstalled it, but then something moved. A hand, just a hand, pale and still, sliding into the frame. The fingers were long, twitching slightly like they were searching for something. After a few seconds, they stopped, and I heard it. A faint, wet breathing sound, muffled through the mic. Then the hand disappeared. The video cut out, and the camera went offline for good. I didn't go back, not even to get my stuff. I called the landlord, told him to keep whatever was left, and never return to that building. It's been almost a year now. I've moved twice since then, and I keep every window locked, every door bolted. Still, every once in a while, I'll wake up in the middle of the night with that same feeling, like someone standing just outside my door, listening. Last week, I bought a new security camera for my current place, just for peace of mind. I set it up in the living room, facing the hallway. This morning, when I checked the feed, there was a short clip recorded around 3 a.m. The camera showed me sleeping on the couch. Nothing unusual until the end. For a split second, before the clip ended, you could see something in the corner of the frame. A shape. It looked like a person standing behind the camera. I can't walk home at night without checking over my shoulder every few steps. I don't know if what happened was real or if my mind just broke for a while, but I swear someone was watching me. At the time, I was living alone in a small apartment on the edge of the city. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom place above a closed-down hair salon. The rent was cheap because the area was quiet, maybe too quiet. Most nights, the only sound was the hum of streetlights and the occasional car passing by. I worked the late shift at a diner and usually walked home around midnight. It wasn't far, maybe a 15-minute walk, and I liked the peace after being around people all day. But that night, something felt different. About halfway home, I got that prickling feeling on the back of my neck, the kind you get when you just know someone's behind you. I slowed down, pretending to check my phone, and glanced over my shoulder. The street was empty. Still, I couldn't shake it. My footsteps sounded too loud, echoing off the buildings, and every few seconds, I thought I heard another set, softer, a few paces behind me. When I finally reached my building, I walked faster, trying not to look paranoid. The front light flickered as I unlocked the door, casting a weird strobe across the lobby. By the time I got inside my apartment, my hands were trembling. I locked the door, twice. Then I checked the windows. Everything seemed fine, but the silence felt wrong. Heavy, like the air was thicker somehow. That's when I noticed it. My curtains were open. I always closed them before leaving for work. Always. I'm the kind of person who double-checks locks and light switches. But there they were, half open, like someone had been standing there, looking out. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself maybe I just forgot, but my stomach was twisting. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the couch, leaving the TV on for background noise. I told myself I'd calm down in a few minutes. But then, around 1 a.m, I heard it again. Footsteps, not in the hallway, inside, slow, careful, coming from the kitchen. At first, I froze. Every muscle in my body locked tight. The TV was low, but I could still hear the faint creak of floorboards. Someone was in my apartment. My breathing went shallow. I reached for my phone, but my hands were shaking so hard that I almost dropped it. I didn't want to move, didn't want to make a sound. I just listened. One step, then another, then silence. It took me a few seconds to realize. The footsteps had stopped right behind the couch. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My body just refused to move. My heartbeat was so loud, I thought whoever was behind me could hear it too. For a second, I tried convincing myself that maybe it was the pipes or the neighbors or something else that made sense. But I knew what I heard. Those were footsteps. The air felt heavier, colder. I could almost feel someone standing there. You know that weird sense you get when another person is close, even if you can't see them? It was exactly like that. My hands were slick with sweat. I forced myself to move, just a little. I turned my head a few inches and caught a glimpse of the dark kitchen. Empty, nothing there. But I swear, for a moment, I saw something, like the faint outline of a shoulder or head just out of view. Then it was gone. I got up fast, my heart pounding, and turned on every light in the apartment. The living room, the bathroom, the kitchen, everything. It was empty. No one there. No open windows. No signs of a break-in. But when I went to check the front door, I froze again. The deadbolt was still locked. The chain too. Whoever had been in there didn't come through the door. That's when I remembered the basement. The landlord kept it unlocked because the fuse box was down there, and it connected to every unit in the building. I never went down there because it smelled like mold and rust. But if someone wanted to sneak in unseen, that was the only way. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? That I heard footsteps? That I felt someone standing behind me? They'd think I was crazy. So I sat awake for hours with the lights on, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting for morning. Around 5 a.m., I finally dozed off. The next day, I told myself I had overreacted. I even laughed about it a bit at work, trying to shake it off. But that night, when I got home, there was something new on my door. A note. It was written in pencil, in small, messy handwriting. It said, "I like when you wear the blue one." I didn't own anything blue. My stomach dropped. I looked around the hallway, expecting to see someone, but it was empty. My hands were shaking as I crumpled the note and ran inside. I locked everything again, even shoved a chair under the doorknob this time. Then, when I went to pull my curtains shut, I noticed something else. Across the street, in the window of the building opposite mine, there was a man, just standing there in the dark. I couldn't see his face, but I could tell he was looking right at me. I dropped to the floor so fast my knee hit the edge of the table. I crawled behind the couch, barely breathing, just listening. My mind was racing. Who was he? How long had he been watching me? For a few minutes, I didn't move. Then curiosity got the better of me. I slowly peeked over the edge of the couch toward the window again. The man was gone. The window across the street was dark, empty, as if no one had ever been there. I wanted to believe I imagined it, but the note was still crumpled in my hand. My fingers trembled as I smoothed it out again, staring at those words. I like when you wear the blue one. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Every little sound made my heart jump. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, the faint buzz of a streetlight outside. Around 2 a.m., I thought I heard something new. A camera shutter. It was faint, almost drowned out by the noise of the city. But I heard it again, a sharp click, coming from the direction of my window. I crawled toward the curtains and pulled them open just an inch. Across the street, the same window was lit again, but this time, there was a faint flash, like the reflection of a lens. Someone was taking pictures of me. I shut the curtains completely and turned off every light. My chest was tight, and my breathing came out in quick, shallow bursts. I didn't want to move, didn't want to make a sound. I just sat there in the dark, hugging my knees, counting the seconds until sunrise. When the morning finally came, I packed a bag and drove to my sister's house 2 towns over. I didn't go back for a week. When I finally did, the landlord met me at the door, looking pale. He said, "We had to change the locks on the basement door. Someone's been living down there." I remember standing there, frozen, not even sure if I heard him right. He went on to explain that when they went down to fix a pipe, they found sleeping bags, food wrappers, and a bunch of photographs taped to the wall, pictures of the tenants, including me. One of them showed me sitting on my couch in my apartment, wearing a blue sweater I had borrowed months ago from a friend. The landlord said whoever it was must have been sneaking in through the basement, moving between units when people weren't home. He said the police were investigating, but they didn't find anyone. I moved out the next day. It's been over a year now, but sometimes, at night, when I close my blinds, I still feel it, that same weight of someone's eyes watching me through the dark. And every now and then, I wake up to the sound of a faint click, like a camera, coming from somewhere outside my window. It started out as something completely normal. I was house-sitting for my aunt while she was out of town for the weekend. It was one of those older houses built in the 60s, the kind that creaks every time you take a step and smells faintly of dust and old wood. She warned me about the basement before she left, said the light down there flickered sometimes, and that I should avoid going in unless absolutely necessary. I didn't think much of it. I mean, every old house has a creepy basement, right? The first night was fine. I ordered takeout, watched a movie, and went to bed early. But sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up to this faint sound coming from below me. At first, I thought it was the pipes or the house settling. It was rhythmic, though, like footsteps, moving back and forth beneath the floorboards. I sat up, holding my breath. The sound stopped. I told myself it was probably my imagination. I turned over and tried to go back to sleep. That's when I heard the basement door creak. Just a soft sound, but enough to make my stomach twist. I got out of bed, grabbed my phone for light, and stepped into the hallway. The house was quiet, except for that faint humming sound you only hear when it's completely silent. I could see the basement door from where I stood. It was halfway open. I was almost certain I'd closed it earlier. My pulse was pounding by then. I tried to laugh it off, convincing myself it must have been a draft or something. But then I saw the light from the basement flicker. The air felt heavy, thick in my chest, like the house itself was holding its breath with me. I stood there for what felt like forever before whispering, "Hello?" Nothing. No movement. No reply. Just the faint sound of something shifting down below, like someone dragging a foot across concrete. I should have gone back to bed, but curiosity got the better of me. I slowly made my way down the stairs, one creaking step at a time, the beam from my phone trembling as my hand started to shake. The air grew colder the further I went. It smelled damp, like old stone and rust. When I reached the bottom, I scanned the room. Boxes, tools, an old washing machine. Nothing seemed out of place. But then, behind the furnace, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A door. It was small, maybe 4 feet tall, built right into the foundation wall. My aunt had never mentioned anything about another room, and from behind it, I swear I heard breathing. I froze where I stood. The sound was faint, almost too soft to be real. Slow, steady breathing, like someone trying not to be heard. I aimed my phone's light toward the small door, but the beam barely reached it. My throat felt dry, and every instinct screamed for me to go back upstairs. But something about that sound, it wasn't just breathing. There was a rhythm to it, almost like whoever or whatever was behind that door was matching my breaths. I took one cautious step forward. The wooden floor creaked under my weight, and the breathing stopped. That silence was somehow worse. I whispered again, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice cracked halfway through. No answer. But a second later, I heard 3 faint knocks from behind the door. Slow, measured, knuckles against concrete. My stomach dropped. I stumbled backward, my heart slamming so hard I thought I might pass out. I didn't even realize my hands were shaking until I saw the light from my phone jittering across the basement walls. I ran up the stairs, 2 at a time, slamming the basement door shut behind me and locking it. I stood there, pressing my back against the door, trying to listen. But the only sound was the thundering in my chest. For the next hour, I sat in the living room, lights on, phone in hand, staring at that door across the hall. Nothing happened. No sounds. No movement. The longer I stared, the more ridiculous I felt. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the knocks were pipes or pressure in the walls or whatever excuse I could invent to stay calm. Finally, I forced myself to lie down on the couch, keeping the lights on just in case. I must have drifted off at some point, because I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating beside me. It was a text from my aunt. It said, "Did you go into the basement?" I frowned, rubbing my eyes. "Yeah," I typed back. "Why?" She replied almost instantly, "Whatever you do, don't open the small door down there." My blood ran cold. I sat up fast, scanning the room like someone might be watching me. The basement door was still closed, but something about her message felt wrong. I texted her again, asking what she meant. No response. I tried calling her, but the line went straight to voicemail. That's when I heard it again. The sound of footsteps, coming from beneath the floor. Only this time, it wasn't slow or faint. It was frantic, fast, like someone running from one side of the basement to the other, slamming into the walls. I jumped up, backing away from the sound. Then it stopped, and something began scratching at the basement door. I didn't move. I just stood there in the middle of the living room, staring at the door, listening to the soft scraping. It was careful now, almost gentle, like whatever was behind it was tracing the outline of the wood. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. My mouth was dry. I kept whispering to myself that I was imagining it, that I was overtired, that old houses made weird noises. But the sound was deliberate. I could hear fingernails dragging across the grain of the door. And then came the whisper. It wasn't loud, but I swear I heard my own name being said from the other side. Slowly, drawn out, like someone who already knew me. That's when I lost it. I grabbed my car keys and bolted out of the house. I didn't even stop to turn off the lights or grab my bag. I drove to a gas station about 10 minutes away and sat in the parking lot, shaking. I tried calling my aunt again, but she still didn't pick up. When I finally built up the courage to go back the next morning, sunlight made everything feel safer. The house looked normal again, quiet and still. I told myself I'd imagined it all. That's what I needed to believe. But when I went down to the basement to check, the small door was open. It was just a crack, but enough for me to see the inside. A cramped space, dirt floor, and something that looked like old bedding pushed into the corner. There were deep scratches on the concrete wall and a smell I can't even describe. I slammed the door shut and ran upstairs. A few days later, my aunt finally called me back. She sounded exhausted. She told me the basement used to belong to the previous owner's brother, a man who had gone missing decades ago after being released from a mental institution. The family said he used to sleep in that little room when he wasn't supposed to be there. They'd find food missing, and sometimes they'd hear breathing at night. The police searched the property back then, but never found him. I wanted to tell her what I heard, what I saw, but the words wouldn't come out. I just listened, staring at the locked basement door across the room. That night, I lay in bed, trying to convince myself it was over. But sometime around 3 a.m., I woke up to the faint sound of footsteps. Slow, careful, coming from under the floorboards again. And then, the whisper, closer this time. It said, "You came back." That night in my old house, it was the first and only time I ever went into the basement alone after dark. Even now, years later, I still hear the sounds in my head sometimes. The faint dragging, the low humming, the whisper that came from somewhere behind me. It started simple. The power had gone out during a storm, and I needed to check the breaker. The basement was the only place it could be. I remember standing at the top of the stairs, holding my phone's flashlight, and feeling that strange heaviness that old basements always seem to have. The kind that makes the air feel too thick, like you're breathing something stale and forgotten. The light from my phone barely cut through the darkness. The wooden stairs creaked with every step, and with each one, I swore I could hear something shift below. I kept telling myself it was just the pipes, the house settling, or maybe water dripping from somewhere. But the deeper I went, the more I noticed how quiet it was. Too quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until your own heartbeat starts to sound too loud. When I reached the bottom, I could smell damp concrete and something faintly metallic, almost like rust or blood. My flashlight trembled slightly as I swept it around the room. The basement was cluttered with old boxes, broken furniture, and a few tools scattered near the wall. I spotted the breaker panel in the corner and made my way toward it. That's when I heard it. A soft, scraping sound coming from behind the old wooden shelves. It stopped the second I pointed my light in that direction. My chest tightened, and I froze, listening. Nothing. Just the hum of distant rain outside. I let out a shaky laugh, trying to convince myself it was a rat or something. I opened the breaker panel, flipped the main switch, and waited. A second later, the power came back on upstairs. I remember feeling this huge wave of relief until I realized the light in the basement hadn't come back on. Just as I turned to leave, I heard it again, this time closer. A long, dragging sound across the concrete floor. I spun around and shined the light at the shelves. For a second, I thought I saw something. A shape, maybe a shoulder, disappearing behind them. My stomach dropped. The shelves weren't against the wall like I always thought. There was a small gap behind them, big enough for someone, or something, to hide. My breathing got faster. I didn't want to go closer, every footstep echoing too loud in the space. The flashlight flickered as I got near the shelves, and I remember whispering something to myself, like a prayer or maybe just a way to break the silence. When I reached the edge, I leaned forward, shining the light into the gap. That's when I saw it, a pale hand slowly sliding back into the darkness. I froze completely. My brain couldn't even process what I'd just seen. For a second, I told myself it had to be my imagination, a trick of the light, or maybe a reflection from something metallic. But deep down, I knew what I saw wasn't that. The way that hand moved, it wasn't mechanical, it wasn't random. It was slow, deliberate, like whoever it belonged to knew I was watching. My flashlight flickered again, and I instinctively stepped back. My throat felt dry. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to get out, but I couldn't make my legs move. I just stood there, staring at the empty space where the hand had been, listening to the sound of my own heart hammering inside my chest. Then came the sound, not scraping this time, breathing, faint, ragged, coming from behind the shelves. I don't know why I didn't just run up the stairs. Maybe I was too scared to turn my back on whatever was there. Or maybe part of me still thought I could make sense of it. I slowly crouched down, shining the light underneath the lowest shelf, trying to see something, anything. The beam caught a bit of movement, something shifting just out of view. And then I heard it whisper. It wasn't clear words, more like someone trying to speak through a mouth full of water. But it was close, too close. I stumbled backward, dropping my phone. The flashlight spun across the floor, throwing wild flashes of light across the concrete and the shelves and the dark corners I didn't want to look at. I heard something brush against the floor, something dragging toward me. My mind was screaming now. I grabbed the phone, but before I could stand up, something cold brushed against my ankle. It wasn't a light touch either. It felt like fingers, long, bony fingers curling around my skin. I kicked hard, scrambling to my feet and backing toward the stairs. The phone slipped from my hand again, the screen shattering when it hit the floor. The light blinked out completely. That moment, That total blackness. It felt endless. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear everything. My heartbeat, the rain outside, and that breathing. Louder now, like it was standing right in front of me. Then the smell hit me, that same metallic scent. Stronger this time, like something old and rotting mixed with rust. My stomach turned. I reached behind me, searching for the stairs. My hand finally brushed against the bottom step. I didn't think, I just climbed. Fast. Halfway up, I heard wood creak. Then a low voice, almost a whisper, but right next to my ear. It said, "Don't leave me here." I don't even remember how I got the basement door shut. I just remember slamming it, locking it, and running straight to my bedroom. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. I tried calling someone, but the screen stayed black. And then, from downstairs, I heard the door creak open again. I didn't go back down. Not at first. I sat on the floor of my room, knees pulled up to my chest, listening. The house was silent except for the rain outside. Every now and then, I thought I heard something shifting below me. A faint thump, a creak of old wood, like someone walking slowly across the basement floor. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. I couldn't tell anymore. My head felt light, and my chest was tight from breathing too fast. I just kept staring at the door, half expecting it to open on its own. But nothing happened. When the rain stopped, the silence felt even worse. I finally gathered enough courage to grab a flashlight from my desk. The power was still out. My phone was dead. Everything in me said, "Don't go down there." But some stupid part of my brain needed to make sure the door was still shut. I crept through the hallway, each step creaking louder than I remembered. The air felt colder near the kitchen, and I swear I could smell that metallic scent again. Faint, but definitely there. My stomach twisted as I turned the corner and saw the basement door. It was open, not wide, but just enough that the darkness behind it looked alive. I shined the light, my hand trembling so badly the beam shook across the walls. "Hello?" I said, barely above a whisper. I don't even know why. Maybe I hoped saying something would make it less real. No answer. Just the sound of something dripping from below. I thought about calling out again, but then the beam caught something near the bottom of the stairs. Muddy footprints, bare feet, small ones, like a child's. They led up the steps, stopping halfway, and then disappeared into the darkness below. That was it for me. I slammed the door shut, locked it again, and this time I pushed the kitchen table in front of it. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even close my eyes. Every time I blinked, I thought I saw that pale hand again, reaching out of the dark. The next morning, everything looked normal. Power came back. My phone charged fine. When I told my friend about what happened, he laughed and said maybe a raccoon got in somehow. I almost believed him until I went to get something from the fridge and noticed the basement door again. The lock was broken, and on the inside of the door, carved deep into the wood, were 3 words I swear weren't there before. "Don't leave me." That was 2 years ago. I moved out a few months later. But sometimes, when it's late and quiet, I still hear that same faint breathing coming from under the floorboards. And every once in a while, I wake up to find the basement key lying on my bedside table, even though I threw it away. I still don't have an explanation for what I saw in that basement. At the time, I had just moved into a small rental house on the edge of town. It was old, but quiet, and the rent was cheap. Too cheap, probably. The landlord told me not to worry about the basement, said it was just storage space, and that the previous tenant had left a few boxes down there. I didn't think much of it. I wasn't planning to go poking around in a dusty basement anyway. The first few nights were fine. The house creaked a lot, but I told myself that was just the wood settling. But around the 4th night, I started hearing this faint tapping noise. It came from somewhere below me, soft and irregular, like someone was knocking from underneath the floorboards. I ignored it at first. I put in my headphones, tried to sleep. But the next night, it came again, a little louder this time. Then silence. It stopped whenever I got out of bed to listen. I checked the walls, the vents, even outside, but everything was still. I figured it was maybe a pipe or an animal, something small that had found its way under the house. Then one night, I was sitting in the living room reading when I heard it again. Not tapping, scratching. Slow, dragging scratches coming from directly under the floor, right beneath where I was sitting. My stomach turned. I could almost picture long nails raking against the wooden beams. I stood up, heart thudding in my chest. The noise stopped instantly. The air in the room felt heavier, like something was waiting for me to move again. I tried to laugh it off, told myself I was being paranoid. But when I walked toward the kitchen, I realized the basement door was open. It had been locked since I moved in. I was sure of it. The door creaked slightly, a faint draft pushing cold air up from below. I could smell something damp, like mold and old earth. I stood there staring into the dark stairwell, frozen. My flashlight was in the drawer, but I couldn't make myself reach for it. The darkness at the bottom of those stairs felt wrong. Not just dark, but deep. Like if I stepped closer, it would swallow the light around me. I closed the door gently and slid the bolt back into place. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about that sound, that scratching, and how it always seemed to stop the second I moved. By morning, I convinced myself it was nothing, probably a raccoon, maybe even just my imagination running wild in a new house. But when I went downstairs the next evening to grab something from the fridge, I noticed something that made my hands go cold. The basement lock was hanging open again, and this time, the door wasn't just cracked, it was wide open. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring at that open doorway, like it was daring me to come closer. The cold air drifting out of it was sharp and metallic, like the smell of wet iron. My first instinct was to call the landlord, but it was nearly midnight, and I didn't want to sound like a paranoid tenant complaining about noises in the dark. So I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and took a few steps toward the basement door. The beam of light barely reached halfway down the stairs. Everything below was swallowed in black. The smell got stronger, damp, rotten wood, and something else. Something faintly sweet, like spoiled fruit. I called out, just to hear my own voice break the silence. "Hello? Anyone down there?" No response. Just that hollow, empty sound of air moving in a space too big for it. I took another step. The wood creaked beneath my foot. Then another creak, not mine, echoed a few feet below me. It was the unmistakable sound of movement. I froze. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I held my breath, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then a faint dragging sound came from somewhere at the bottom of the stairs, something shifting slowly across the floor. I backed away, keeping my light on the darkness below. Then, for just a second, I thought I saw something move, a shape, pale, low to the ground, gone before my brain could even process what it was. That was enough for me. I slammed the door shut, bolted it, and shoved a chair up against it for good measure. I didn't care how ridiculous it looked. I just needed to feel like something was keeping whatever that was down there. I didn't sleep again that night. Every creak and pop of the house made me jump. I left all the lights on, sitting on the couch with my phone in my hand until the sun started to rise. When morning came, I went straight to the basement door. The chair was still there. The bolt was still in place. I almost laughed out loud, embarrassed by how scared I'd been. But then I noticed something that made me stop smiling. There were muddy fingerprints on the edge of the door. Small, smudged, like someone had been feeling their way up the stairs. I moved out into the hallway, scanning the floor. There were faint tracks, tiny streaks of brown that trailed away toward the kitchen. They stopped just before the refrigerator, as if whatever left them had stood there for a moment, then vanished. I didn't hear any noises for the rest of the day. I even started convincing myself again that it had to be some kind of animal. But that night, just as I started to drift off, my phone buzzed. A notification from the motion sensor app I'd installed earlier that morning, one of those cheap ones that alert you if there's movement in your house while you're away. The notification said, "Motion detected basement." I opened the camera feed, and at first, I saw nothing, just that narrow stairwell leading down into the dark. Then the feed glitched for a second, and in that flash of static, I saw it. A face, right at the bottom of the stairs. It was pale and hollow, the eyes just dark pits. The feed froze before I could get a better look, and when it came back, the stairs were empty again. I didn't go down there that night. I couldn't. I just sat on my bed, staring at the motion alert on my phone, trying to convince myself it was a glitch or a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew what I saw. The next morning, I called the landlord. I told him about the noises, The smell, the door opening on its own. I left out the part about the face. I didn't want him thinking I'd lost it. He sighed and said the basement was supposed to be sealed. He hadn't been down there in years. Apparently, the previous tenant used it for storage but moved out suddenly, leaving most of his stuff behind. I asked why. He paused for a second before saying, he complained about noises too. That made my stomach turn. When he offered to come by later that afternoon to check it out, I said yes. I didn't want to be there alone anymore. But noon came and went, and he didn't show up. I called. No answer. By 3, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see what was down there. I unbolted the door. The air that drifted out was colder than before, like it had been waiting. I turned on my phone's flashlight again and started down the stairs, one step at a time, the boards moaning beneath me. My breath sounded too loud, too fast. When I reached the bottom, the smell hit me full force. I swept the light around. Old furniture covered in sheets, cardboard boxes stacked against the wall, a rusted water heater in the corner. Everything looked normal, just forgotten. Then I noticed the floor. There was a patch near the center where the concrete looked darker, wet somehow. I crouched down, shining my light on it. The edges of the damp spot weren't smooth. They looked smeared, like fingerprints. I stood up fast. My head brushed against something hanging from the ceiling. I aimed the light upward and saw a string tied to an old light bulb. Out of reflex, I pulled it. The light flickered on. For a split second, I wished it hadn't. There were drawings all over the basement walls, messy, childlike sketches made in what looked like charcoal. Faces, dozens of them, some smiling, some screaming. And in the center of one wall, written over and over in uneven letters, was a single word. Stay. My flashlight flickered. The bulb above me buzzed, dimmed, then went out completely. I was left standing in the dark. That's when I heard it again, breathing, slow and steady. Not mine. It was close this time, coming from the far corner of the room. I turned toward the sound, my hand shaking so hard the light bounced across the walls. For just a second, I caught a glimpse of movement. A figure crouched low to the ground, pale skin blending into the darkness. It crawled toward me faster than anything should move. I don't remember climbing the stairs. I just remember slamming the basement door and running out of the house barefoot, not stopping until I reached the street. I didn't go back. The landlord called a few days later, angry that I'd left my things behind. I told him he could keep them. He said something that still makes my blood run cold. He said he'd gone down there after I left. Said the basement was completely empty. No drawings, no boxes, no signs anyone had been down there for years. He laughed and told me I must have been dreaming. But then he hesitated and said, there was one thing though. The basement door was open when I got there, and the floor near the stairs was wet, like something had just come up. I moved to another city not long after that. I still check my motion alerts every now and then, even though that house isn't mine anymore. Sometimes, late at night, the app sends me a notification. Motion detected. Basement. It was the first time I ever felt true fear, the kind that crawls under your skin and stays there, even years later. Back then, I had just moved into an old 2-story house on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was cheap, and the landlord didn't ask too many questions. The place had this strange layout, though. The basement door was hidden behind the pantry, almost like someone had tried to keep it secret. The first time I saw it, I remember thinking how weird it was that a door could feel wrong. I didn't go down there for the first few weeks. The landlord told me the basement was just storage, full of junk from the previous owners. I didn't have a reason to explore it, not until that one night when the power went out. It was late, maybe close to midnight. I was watching TV when everything suddenly went dark. The hum of the refrigerator stopped, and for a moment, the silence was so heavy, it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. I grabbed my phone for light, but of course, it was nearly dead. That's when I remembered the breaker box was in the basement. I wasn't thrilled about going down there, but the air upstairs was getting colder by the minute. I opened the pantry door and found the old basement door just behind it. The handle was cold, like it hadn't been touched in years. When I turned it, it gave this long, dragging creak that echoed down the stairwell. The smell hit me first. Damp concrete, dust, and something faintly metallic. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the darkness, the beam catching glimpses of cobwebs and peeling paint. The stairs groaned under my weight as I made my way down, one step at a time. About halfway down, I thought I heard something. A shuffle, maybe. It came from below, soft and quick, like someone dragging their feet across the floor. I froze, straining to listen, but it stopped. I told myself it was a rat or something. Old houses always have those. When I reached the bottom, I swept the light across the room. The basement was larger than I expected, full of old furniture, boxes, and broken shelves. The shadows seemed to bend with every movement of my light, stretching and shrinking across the walls. I found the breaker box in the corner, opened it, and flipped a few switches. Nothing happened. Then I heard it again, a sound like slow breathing, steady and heavy, coming from the far side of the room. It wasn't echoing or distant. It was close, too close. My heart started pounding so loud, I could barely hear anything else. I called out, just a shaky hello, but my voice came back distorted, swallowed by the thick air. That's when I realized I could see my breath. The basement had gotten colder, unnaturally so. The beam of my phone light began to flicker, and every time it dimmed, I swore I saw something in the darkness, a faint outline of movement, low to the ground. I took a step back, and my foot brushed against something. Pointed the light down. There was a shoe lying on its side. It looked old and dirty, covered in dust. But what made me freeze was that it wasn't alone. Next to it was another one, positioned like someone had just stepped out of them. And then came the whisper, right behind me. I didn't catch what it said, just the sound. Low, broken, and so close, I felt the breath against my neck. I turned around so fast I almost dropped my phone, but there was nothing there. Just empty air and shadows that didn't feel empty at all. I ran. I didn't care about the lights anymore. I bolted up the stairs, slammed the door shut, and pushed the pantry shelf in front of it. My heart was racing, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. That night, I slept with the lights on, sitting up in bed, listening. For hours, I could still hear faint creaks coming from under the floor, like someone was moving around down there, waiting. I told myself it was just the house settling, just old wood in my imagination. But the next morning, when I finally worked up the nerve to open the pantry again, the basement door was slightly ajar. Even though I knew I'd locked it, I didn't go near that door for the rest of the day. Every time I walked past the kitchen, though, I could feel it, that strange pull, like the air around the pantry was heavier than the rest of the house. I tried to ignore it, told myself maybe the lock was old, maybe it slipped open on its own. But the thought of what I'd heard down there kept circling in my mind. The breathing, the whisper, and those shoes. That night, I pushed a chair under the pantry handle before going to bed. I even left the hallway light on, but around 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. No sound, no dream, just that gut-deep sense that something was wrong. The light in the hallway was flickering through the crack under my door. I sat up and listened. For a long time, there was nothing, just the faint ticking of the clock and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, from somewhere below the floor, came a soft thump, and another. It was rhythmic, almost like footsteps, moving slowly from one end of the basement to the other. I could picture it in my head, those steps pacing back and forth in the dark, beneath where I was sitting. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped. A few seconds later, I heard something else. It sounded like the basement door creaking open again. The hinges groaned, long and slow. I stared at my bedroom door, half expecting it to swing open any second. When nothing happened, I finally worked up the courage to grab my flashlight and creep into the hallway. The light was still flickering, casting broken shadows down the walls. I could see the pantry from where I stood. The door was open again, wider this time. I should have called someone, the police, the landlord, anyone. But instead, I just stood there, heart hammering, flashlight shaking in my hand. Then something caught my eye. There were muddy footprints on the floor, bare ones, leading from the pantry to the hallway. The prints stopped halfway down, right before the light, like whoever or whatever made them didn't want to step where it was bright. I slowly backed away until I reached my room again. I didn't close the door this time. I just kept watching the hallway, the open pantry, the darkness beyond it. At some point, I must have dozed off sitting up. because when I opened my eyes again, the morning light was creeping through the blinds. Everything looked normal. The pantry was closed, no footprints, no sound. I almost convinced myself it was some kind of dream, until I went to grab my phone from the nightstand. It wasn't where I'd left it. I found it later that day, at the bottom of the basement stairs. The screen was cracked, and the flashlight was still on, pointing straight ahead into the darkness like it had been dropped while someone was standing there. But I hadn't gone down there, not since that first night. I didn't even remember opening that door. That was the last straw for me. I couldn't stay in that house another night. I called my landlord that afternoon and told him I was moving out by the end of the week. He didn't even sound surprised, just sighed quietly and said, "Yeah, you're not the first." That line stuck with me. I spent the next few nights sleeping on the couch in the living room, with every light on. I kept the pantry door taped shut and avoided even looking at it. Still, no matter what I did, I could hear things from below. Sometimes it was faint tapping, like someone running their fingers along the underside of the floorboards. Other times, it was a single creak, slow and deliberate, like a step on an old stair. Once I swear I heard breathing again, raspy, uneven, like it was right beneath where I was lying. By the last night, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept properly in days. My head felt foggy, my hands shook constantly. I told myself to ignore it. Just one more night, and I'd be gone. But around midnight, the lights started to flicker again. Then, one by one, they went out. I sat up fast, every muscle in my body tense. The air felt thick, almost humid, and from the direction of the kitchen, I heard it. The sound of the tape peeling off the pantry door. It was slow, careful, like someone was trying not to be heard. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just listened. The door creaked open. Then came the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Not fast, not frantic. Just slow, steady steps, climbing upward from the basement. The boards creaked under each one. When the last step stopped, I realized it wasn't the sound that scared me the most. It was the silence that followed. Because I knew somehow, whoever or whatever it was had reached the top. The air around me changed. The smell hit first, like damp earth and something metallic. My skin prickled all over. I aimed my flashlight toward the kitchen and turned it on. The beam landed on the pantry door. It was open wide, but there was no one there. Only the faint outline of muddy footprints leading out across the kitchen floor toward the hallway where I was sitting. The footprints stopped halfway, just like before. Then, just as I was about to back away, I heard breathing again. This time, not from below. It was right behind me. I turned around, but the light flickered out at the exact same moment. I felt a rush of cold air brush past my face, like someone had leaned close enough to whisper. Then, nothing. When I woke up, it was morning. The lights were all back on. The pantry door shut tight. I packed my things that same hour and left. I never went back. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up the address online. Turns out, the previous tenant had been reported missing, last seen in that house. Police found her phone in the basement. Flashlight still on, the same basement my phone ended up in. I still don't know what's down there. I don't want to know. But sometimes, when I can't sleep, I swear I still hear it in my head. The sound of those slow, steady footsteps coming up the stairs. I still can't go near a basement without feeling sick to my stomach. Back then, I was renting a small house on the edge of town. It was cheap, a little too cheap, but I didn't care. I just lost my job and needed somewhere quiet to figure things out. The landlord mentioned the basement only once, said it was mostly storage space, and that I probably wouldn't need to go down there. I didn't think much of it at the time. The first few weeks were fine. The house was old, the kind where every step makes the floor groan, but it felt cozy enough. Until one night, when I heard something from below. It was faint, like a dull thud, followed by a dragging sound. It was past midnight, and I was lying on the couch, half asleep when it started. I told myself it was just the pipes, or maybe a raccoon under the house. But the sound kept going, steady and deliberate, like someone slowly moving boxes across a concrete floor. I turned off the TV and listened. The dragging stopped. Then came a soft tapping sound. It wasn't random. It had rhythm, like someone knocking on wood. I remember sitting there frozen, trying to convince myself it was nothing. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. Every little noise seemed louder. When the tapping stopped, I told myself it was over, that I was just tired. But when I got up to go to bed, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The basement door, which was always closed, was slightly open, just an inch. I stared at it for what felt like forever. There was no draft, no reason for it to move on its own. The light in the hallway flickered once, and I swear I heard the faint sound of breathing coming from the crack in the door. I backed away, locked myself in my bedroom, and barely slept that night. The next morning, the door was closed again. I didn't remember shutting it. I told myself maybe I had, half asleep, trying to calm my nerves. But deep down, I knew I hadn't gone near it. That day, I went to the basement door and put my ear against it. It was silent, but there was a smell, musty, like wet soil and something metallic underneath. I felt a cold draft seeping through the crack. I almost opened it. My hand was on the knob, but I stopped when I heard the faintest sound from the other side, a single creak, like a footstep on an old stair. I let go of the handle, stepped back, and told myself I'd call the landlord about it later. That night, the noises came again, soft dragging, then tapping, then that slow, heavy creak of wood bending under weight. Except this time, it didn't sound like it was staying in the basement. It sounded closer. I remember sitting upright in bed, every nerve in my body alert. The sound wasn't coming from below anymore. It was on the stairs. My first thought was that someone had broken in, maybe hiding down there for days. My second thought was worse. What if they were coming up now? I held my breath, straining to listen. The creaking stopped halfway up the steps. Then, silence. The air felt heavy, like the whole house was holding its breath with me. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I waited for what felt like minutes before I worked up the courage to move. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped into the hallway. The house was dark, the kind of dark that eats the edges of the light, where every shadow seems to move when you're not looking directly at it. The basement door was at the end of the hall, closed, perfectly closed. I whispered, "Hello," before I even realized I'd said it out loud. My voice sounded strange in the silence, too small for the space. No response. I took one cautious step closer. That same smell hit me again, wet, metallic, and faintly rotten. It was stronger now, leaking out through the thin gap under the door. The wood around the knob looked darker than before, like it had absorbed moisture or something worse. My fingers trembled when I reached for the lock. I didn't want to open it, but part of me needed to know. I flicked the latch up, slowly, trying not to make a sound. The second the lock clicked open, something tapped back, not a random knock. It was 3 short, deliberate taps. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. My flashlight flickered once, then twice, before dying completely, leaving me in total darkness. I tried to back away, but my heel hit something soft on the floor, a blanket maybe, or a pile of laundry, except it was warm. That's when I felt it, something brushing against my ankle. Not a bug, not fabric. Fingers, cold, damp fingers, curling slightly, like they were testing if I was real. I screamed and stumbled back, slamming the basement door shut so hard the frame shook. I locked it, then pushed a chair against the handle, backing away until my shoulders hit the wall. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stood there, shaking, listening. Then the tapping started again. 3 slow knocks, then silence, then 3 more, and then a voice, so faint I thought I imagined it. It said my name. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the hallway, the flashlight dead in my lap, my phone clutched in my hand. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but I couldn't explain what was happening without sounding insane. Every few minutes, I'd hear it again, that soft tapping from the other side of the door. Sometimes 3 times, sometimes just once, drawn out, like it was thinking. When the first hint of morning light finally crept through the window, the knocking stopped, just like that. The air felt lighter again, like the house could finally breathe. I didn't open the door. Not that day. Not for 2 more. When I finally got the courage to check, I waited until my roommate was home. We stood there together, daylight spilling across the floor, the door still locked with the chair braced against it. I tried to laugh it off, said maybe it was just rats or pipes, but my hands were shaking as I unlocked it. The smell hit us immediately, stronger than before. My roommate gagged and covered his mouth. I stepped inside, holding a towel over my nose. The basement looked the same, old boxes, laundry, a flickering light bulb. But the floor near the stairs was wet, not just damp, soaked, like something had been dragged through the water. We followed the trail to the far wall, where a small square panel sat half open. I didn't remember ever seeing it before. It looked like a crawl space, maybe for wiring. My roommate leaned in to shine his phone light. Then he froze. I asked what he saw, but he didn't answer. He just stood there, completely still. I took the phone from his hand and looked for myself. Inside the crawl space were old photos, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, pinned to the wood with rusty nails. Most were too damaged to see clearly, but the ones that weren't showed faces, our faces, me, my roommate, even one of me sleeping from a few nights ago. We both ran upstairs and slammed the door again. I moved out the next week. Sometimes I tell myself it was some sick prank, maybe someone living down there before we moved in. That would be the logical answer. But logic doesn't explain what happened a few days later. I was unpacking at my new apartment when I found one of those old photos slipped between my clothes, the one of me sleeping. Only this time, the picture wasn't old or damaged. It was clear, and I was wearing the same shirt I had on right then.